Hi, I'm Ben,
And I'm Josh.
and this is the Bad at Magic podcast, the podcast about games, life, and other things, and welcome to episode 94.
So, Ben, when you and I met, we met on an Air Force base.
Yeah?
That's it. I was just waiting for you to acknowledge that before I kept talking. So, if you recall, our entire existence there was mired in, you and I specifically, was IT infrastructure, making sure that all the phones worked, making sure that when you turned your computer on, you had access to email,
Radios,
blah.
SATCOM, all
Radio,
that.
SATCOM, the lights on the runway, all of that stuff was our responsibility for some reason. But this entire base and all of its infrastructure was really there to prop up and support only a handful of operational squadrons. And
yeah.
Those were the quote unquote operators. These are the guys that go out and the guys and the gals, excuse me, inclusive,
right.
It's 2023. The people that go out and, kill people and blow stuff up. They project
that base
air
existed to project combat air power. In this case, it was F-15s and F-22s.
Yes. And there was multiple flying squadrons. Everything breaks down into the military hierarchy. But one of the fighter squadrons that was at Langley when we met was the 94th Fighter Squadron.
Episode 94.
Episode 94. It's actually one of the oldest fighter squadrons in the Air Force. It was formed in 1917 when it was still the Army Air Corps. And it was also the very first fighter squadron to ever deploy F-22s to an operational area of responsibility, AOR.
Yes, we were there and part of that, and it was exciting to be part of the operationalization. Oh my, what kind of words do you come up with? Military of the F-22 when it first came online and started being available, and there was a lot of challenges, some interesting setbacks, but what a cool thing that we didn't even know we were going to be part of.
I love the words and just the enthusiasm that you had in your tone of voice when you're talking about that, because I was also there at that time, and I came away with an entirely different narrative when it comes to deploying that aircraft.
The hopelessness of employing government.
Well, it's the idea.
Machines.
So the F-22 specifically has a very high communications requirement. There is a lot of IT infrastructure that's on the back end of making sure that plane
to support it and make sure it works.
To do what it does. And so even though we had to work hand in hand with the operational squadron to make sure that all of the infrastructure necessary to keep that thing flying went with them wherever they went, we got none of the glory. Everybody was always just talking about how awesome the plane was and its capabilities. Nobody gave a crap about the comm guys that were standing in the background. That thing would do literally nothing if we weren't standing here, but you're welcome.
Do you know about the F-22 International Dateline incident?
I don't. Please tell me more. Is it declassified?
It is. This happened in 2007. It was when they were, still reaching for full operating capability, the F-22, and they took some F-22s and they were just kind of stretching their legs. They're like, all right, we got them flying around at the training base and at the test base, and we're going to fly. So we'll fly some from Virginia to Hawaii, and then we'll fly to Japan. Well, what happened? I don't know if you remember this, but in 2007, when they took 3 ships and they sent them up over the ocean to fly across Japan, and when they crossed the international date line, all of their computers crashed. And they lost their navigation systems. So they're over the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles of water in every direction, and all of their navigation systems failed and crashed.
That's bad. Did they have
It was literal Y2K.
Gotta love software bugs like that. Oh, it's fine. We'll push out a patch and everything will be good. They said on the radio to the guys that are in a dark cockpit over the Pacific Ocean, the most deadly stretch of anything anywhere,
right,
with no hope of finding where they were supposed to go.
Yeah. So I think one of them was able to get their computers rebooted and made it, and the other 2 kind of held hands and went back to Hawaii, and utterly embarrassed.
Well, if you still have the radio working, I don't remember this, but I was not just a comm guy. I was also a pilot. So if your radio works, you can, if you're close enough to a major airport, call and basically ask for help. It's like, hey, I'm lost. Please tell me where to go.
Right. But they were somewhere over the Pacific. So yeah, I'll put a link to a video or something in the show notes of it. But that was an interesting thing that happened. They, of course, fixed the bug. And now the F-22 is fighting ready and can shoot down any dangerous Chinese weather balloons flying over the United States.
Oh, those weather balloons are terrifying.
All right, Josh, you sent me You sent me a link this week about something we talked about in the podcast in the past, and that was that there was this law that some countries were adopting that allowed people to migrate to their countries if they were bringing a steady flow of income from their host country.
Yes, if you have a full-time teleworking job and you can prove that and you can prove levels of income, there's different requirements for different countries, but you can apply for what's called a digital nomad visa, where the country will give you permission to live and work in their country, but you just keep working remotely at your job in another country.
Right.
So what was really cool is like they're just expanding this idea that you can live and work anywhere. Please just come here and spend your money at our local businesses and pay our local taxes and do all that stuff.
Right. So you think when they've thought of everything, like every country you could go to, every place you could go, there's still somewhere else.
Yes, and this was so cool. There is a cruise line that decided, I can see it already. I can see this bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, like 26-year-old in a board meeting sitting in the back, not at the table, but like just supporting somebody else. And there's like the CEO up at the front, like ranting and raving, we have got to drive revenues up. Everybody hates cruises. Nobody's on these boats. And this kid goes, sir, I've got a crazy idea, but I need one cruise ship and like a year of unfettered access to it. So this cruise line is offering a cabin to a person for a set price. Like you pay a fixed price to them. It was something like $300,000 or some nonsense. But you get it for the whole calendar year.
$300,000?
I think that's what it was. It might have been less than that. I have to go back and watch the clip again. It might have. It's definitely six figures. But for this amount of money, you get to have a cabin on a cruise ship for a full calendar year. It's going to go to all these different locations all over the planet. And that's just where you live now. You're just going to live on this ship for a year and telework using their satellite connectivity.
Man, there's so many questions I have about this. You probably did too. Like, for instance, if you're going to accept $300,000 or however much it was from a customer in order to let them stay on a cabin for a year, you have got to have rock solid, redundant IT infrastructure.
Right.
Like, if you're going to strand someone at sea and allow them to telework and then they can't, like that's a disaster. That's a level 1 emergency.
Yes, so that's what you've got to take into account when you're talking about doing this, right? Like how much risk are you willing to try to accept to be a part of this crazy world like trotting adventure while you're just doing your normal day-to-day job? Like, are you willing to risk the comms going down in like for an extended period of time and you potentially losing your job if you're not available versus I mean, it's a cruise, and like looking at the documentation, it's all inclusive. So everything that you would expect a cruise to be. So it's like a buffet meal, 3 meals a day, all the amenities like the pool, the gym, all of that stuff, all access. You pay one fixed price, and you have access to everything with no additional charges.
So that makes me wonder if there are people that live like this already, but on land.
Just live in all-inclusive resorts all the time?
Yeah, just live an all-inclusive life, but on land, and they're like, I really would like to do this at sea.
I don't know if this is... So who came up with this first? Did somebody come asking the cruise like, hey, can I just live on your boat for a year? Or was it the cruise line that was like, we have an opportunity with this digital nomad stuff to drive up or to create an entire new sector in the market. People that are displaced by... I mean, let's face it. If you live in the United States right now, you can't help but be aware of rising interest rates and housing prices. Right. I think my house is still worth, even with everything coming down, my house is still worth twice what I paid for it.
That's an interesting idea to think of like a berth on a cruise ship as just real estate.
Well, because if I'm not going to lie to you, Ben, if I wasn't in the military and I didn't have access to the VA loan where you don't have to put any money down for your house, I would not have been able to afford to buy this house. I talk to younger coworkers that are struggling to make rent every month, let alone try to save enough 10 or 20% that they'll need to buy a house, especially with the inflated prices and the high interest rates for the mortgages right now. So if you're stuck in this perpetually paying rent for a place, wouldn't it be worth it to then why don't I just pay a slightly higher rent, depending on where you live in the country, to this cruise line and get all the amenities along with it, and I get to live here for a year?
Doesn't a 2-week cruise only cost like $1,000?
I have no idea what the price is.
Okay, I think it does. It only costs like $1,000. So if you were following that, then it would only be, whatever. It shouldn't exceed $100,000 for a year.
So the number that I said earlier, the $300,000, I don't know if that's right. This is
Okay.
like my vague memory of watching this.
I was going to say,
couple days ago.
even if there is a segment of the population that's willing to do the digital nomad thing, wants to be on a cruise ship, really all you're asking for is for them to not kick you off at the end of whatever 2-week cruise they're on. You're like, no, I just want to stay on the boat instead of have you make me get off. Like, and then have enough income to pay for this in addition to their, normal life costs.
So the question is this just, are they going to designate one cruise ship? And like, this is the digital nomad cruise ship. So it's not like you have to deal with like going to a port and tens of thousands of people swapping out like, oh, all of the old people that are on vacation are leaving and all the new people that are on vacation are coming. So everybody is at peak obnoxiousness all the time.
Or is it a bunch of people like you?
Exactly. Or is this just a floating apartment building with everybody doing their work?
For sure that no one's dog is going to poop on your lawn and
yeah, and all your meals are paid for. And there's like, if you're going to take a quote unquote vacation, they're going to stop at multiple ports every weekend. You can go to any of the bars, any of the pools, any of the cool fun things that they have on this cruise ship anyway. Like,
all right. I got a question for you.
Okay.
How many things would have to change in your life before you fell inside of all these circles on this Venn diagram we're laying out?
I will tell you right now, if I didn't have kids, I would already be pushing to try to be a digital nomad.
Okay.
It's all about, I'm trying to bring...
But not necessarily on a cruise ship.
It would be on the table. I'm not going to lie. It would be on the table. Well, I say that, but at the same time, my wife and I both have horrible, horrible motion sickness, and neither of us has ever been on a cruise.
Right.
So that might be a deal breaker if the cruise ship like makes us sick the entire time that we're on it. But the idea of I'm trying to bring permanence to my kids' lives and give them a stable, existence as during their formative years, that kind of restricts me to the amount of movement or the amount of change that I'm willing to accept in my life right now to take advantage of weird opportunities like this.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Digital nomad at sea.
Well, imagine. All right, so let's say that there is a cruise line that is offering to be a digital nomad full time for let's say $150,000, right?
I'm still wondering what's going on behind the scenes. Like, are they like, all right, let's take our creakiest, oldest, smallest ship in the fleet that nobody wants to ride on anyway, and see if we can find a second life for it as something else?
Well, presumably they're doing the opportunity cost analysis where having somebody on this full time is better than having somebody on it part time that's paying more. So,
or having no one on it at all because post-COVID nobody wants to go on a cruise ship. I'll tell you, I don't.
Let's presume that they are setting prices that it is equally, if not more, profitable for them as a company to have these people on it for a full length of time than the vacation cruise ship setup.
Sure.
And there's so many variables and buttons and knobs that they could switch for this. Like, we'll make these 3 floors permanent residents, and these other floors will be all the vacationers.
Okay.
Like, there's all kinds of stuff they could do here, right?
Yeah, and any rental type market like this has this thing where like they'll trade a little bit lower price for the guarantee of having someone in a room as opposed to a higher price for the possibility of having someone in a room.
Yes. Well, now look at it from this perspective. Let's say I don't have any kids and I'm willing to entertain this idea of going on a digital nomad cruise for a year for, let's call it $150,000. Okay. I just told you earlier, my house is worth twice what I paid for it.
Right.
If I were to liquidate my house and pay off the mortgage that's already on it, I would walk away with enough cash to pay for this cruise for at least another 2, 3, maybe 4 years, depending on what the price is set at. So now I can look at this and be like, okay, I could sell my house, cash out, maybe invest the difference in the meantime and earn some interest on, the couple $100,000 I didn't spend for this first year.
Yeah.
And then just go on this digital nomad cruise and bank or bet on the fact that I'm expecting the housing market to come down.
And have zero unexpected expenses.
Zero unexpected expenses, a ton of money in savings or what would presumably be high yield investments, a steady place to live with internet connectivity and all the food and whatever I'm going to need for the next calendar year.
You wouldn't even be able to order stuff off Amazon. Like, that would just be money in your pocket.
Yeah, you wouldn't need to. Like that, you're right. There's a ton of ancillary expenses that just evaporate because the fact that you're at sea and not in a house.
Yeah.
And then if I'm on this cruise for a year, maybe 2, and the housing market does come back down, who's to say I can't go buy another house and jump off the boat now?
Okay. All right. Well, I'm interested to know how this goes. I don't know how to put a placeholder on this, but maybe in a year or 2 we look this up and find if this idea evaporates or if they're converting their third ship.
I'm going to bet we're going to get a bell curve of reporting on people that actually try this, okay? Everybody in the middle that thought it was fine, we're not going to hear from them. We're going to hear from people that have nightmare stories about how the boat broke down in the middle of the Atlantic and they got fired from their job because they didn't have internet connectivity for 2 weeks straight. And then we're going to hear from the people on the other side that are like, this was amazing. I liquidated my whole life. I saved hundreds of thousands of dollars, and now I'm way better off than I ever was before.
Yeah, so I want to categorize this into something we talk about on the podcast, and that is the idea that the future isn't necessarily giant bustling urban metropolises. And metropoli, this is something that falls in that category of if the future isn't everyone moving to a big futuristic city, what is it? And this is one example of what it is.
This is an example of if you have an information or like a digital services type job. Like, there's no reason an IT guy couldn't do remote administration. Like, a ton of artists that produce material or content for people could do this. Me, absolutely. I'm a knowledge worker. Like, all I do is move numbers from one column to another on a spreadsheet all day. There's no reason I couldn't do this. There's a lot of professions that could take advantage of this.
Yeah. So my family we're not like a go out on an adventure every weekend kind of family. It feels like you guys have a pretty good pace of adventures, but we had a couple this week, so I want to tell you about them.
Well, you mean adventures other than like skirting the law and trying to knock down police barriers to just cross the street?
I mean, other than staying at home and just doing whatever's happening to you, like the soccer game because your kid's on the soccer team.
Okay.
So my wife's best friend, I only found this out after the fact. My wife's best friend, who is her maid of honor at our wedding, we've known her for years and years. She was watching, I don't know, some documentary on Netflix where they were talking about zoos, and she got a bee under her bonnet that she was going to go to all the best zoos. So she told her husband this, and he kind of ran with it, went in the other room for 2 hours, made a spreadsheet of like the 25 best zoos in the United States, and then planned like when they could go see them all.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
So the first one on their list was the Audubon Zoo in New Orleans, which even though it's in the same state I'm in, it's kind of far away. It's like 4.5 hours, 5 hours, depending on traffic.
To get to a zoo?
To get to a zoo.
Ugh.
So because it was my wife's best friend, she's like, I want to do it. Let's make it happen. I'm like, good. We needed an excuse to plan a trip to New Orleans because we didn't want to leave Louisiana without having gone to New Orleans. So let's make it happen. So
you turned it into a whole thing.
Yeah, so we tacked an extra day on it, and we went down there to go see all this stuff.
Okay.
So we drive down to New Orleans, and I don't know. Hurricane Katrina happened in 2007 or 5 or whenever it was. 2005.
The long ago.
Yeah, and it's been almost 20 years since then, and we're wondering like, what's it going to be? I wasn't expecting to see visible damage, but just there'd been lots of rumors of like mass. Basically, the people that had the means to move out did, and the ones that don't stayed, and it kind of turns into this urban decay. So
what you're saying is a large chunk of the population that had wealth or affluence left, and then there was no one to backfill them. And so like
right.
Are you saying just the mean socio-demographics of the area decreased by a couple of pay grades?
Exactly. That. So when we got there, it wasn't, I don't know. I just had the expectations in my mind and then what it actually was. It's a middle-sized U.S. city with skyscrapers and a stadium for their National Football League team and their baseball team. Or they don't have a baseball team. Their NBA basketball team and those kinds of things. So we got there and went down to the French Quarter, which, as you probably know, New Orleans itself is older than the United States.
Right.
French.
It was French, yeah.
Right. French settlers arrived there back in like the 1500s.
Fun fact, we acquired Louisiana as part of the Louisiana Purchase.
And it has this weird French history where there's still things in the French language and this ties to the past and everything's named after French places and all of that, and it influences the cuisine and the culture. So we went down to Bourbon Street, the famous Bourbon Street of stories and videos and all of that stuff. And you could see the French influence in the architecture, and then it was nothing like that. It felt like going to Fremont Street in Las Vegas.
Just completely different from what you were expecting.
No, neon lights and people carrying like gaudy, alcoholic drinks in like disposable plastic containers and
Yes. The big 3-foot
costumes.
tall margaritas with the swirly straws at the top.
Yeah, that.
I
But they weren't
guarantee
margaritas.
you
They're
probably would have
daiquiris.
enjoyed it more if you had one.
So we walked down Bourbon Street for a while with my 3 kids, all kind of wide-eyed, and we're like, yeah, this ain't great. We've seen enough. We went and had some Cajun cuisine at a restaurant, and then we got out of there. So we went to the Audubon Zoo next day. I don't have anything to say about that. It's just a zoo. It's fine. If you like zoos, it's a good one.
We should talk about zoos after you're done with explaining the rest of your adventure here.
One thing I really was interested in was just how the geography of New Orleans influenced one of the most common things of existence, and that is what we do with our dead.
Okay.
So most places, at least in European settled countries, we have this tradition of putting them in a box the size of barely larger than the size of a human, burying them in the ground. But in New Orleans, a lot of it's below sea level because of the way it's been built, and you can't if you dig a hole in the ground, it fills with water.
Well, that's unfortunate.
So
you're not going to be able to. Yeah, that's not a good place to put a body.
And for some reason, for whatever reasons, in some cultures, like in Japan, where their space is such a premium, the culture that's taken place is cremating someone and putting them in an urn, so it reduces their space that they're required to take up. But for whatever reason, that didn't happen that way in New Orleans, and it became all of their cemeteries are above ground.
Okay, so like a necropolis, they have buildings and they intern them in like stone or something.
But buildings and just like above ground coffins. I don't know what the right word for that is. There's crypts and sepulchers and all those words. I don't know which one. One of those words.
I haven't done an undead themed Dungeons and Dragons session in a while, so I don't know those vocabulary words off the top of my head right now either.
Yeah, so there's these vast cemeteries in New Orleans, and they're really obvious as soon as you get there. It feels different. When you get to New Orleans and you look around and you see these cemeteries, it's like someone took all the coffins and put them on top of the ground instead of under it. Whereas if you go past another cemetery in the United States, it's just like rolling hills with, scattered headstones.
That's interesting. Yeah, cemeteries, for the most part, from my experiences in other cities, they're very unobtrusive. It's almost, you kind of want to relegate them to the background. We don't want to make them front and center as part of the local culture or whatever. It's just one of those unnecessary and unpleasant facts of living in a highly populated area.
Yeah. And I've found, as I've traveled, if you take a moment and try to find a local cemetery and go there, there's lots of interesting things that you'll find about a local culture, about people's relationships with their mortality.
I'm shaking my head because you are the weirdest person. Like
if you go to Italy, go to a cemetery. I know that's on no one's bucket list. Go to a cemetery in Italy. They're amazing.
Yeah, that whole Leaning Tower thing, skip that. Venice and its canals, that's kind of lame. You gotta go see the cemeteries.
That's perfect because I hated Pisa. It's boring and lame. But if I went to Pisa, you might find the cemetery more interesting than the tower.
I was being deliberately facetious, and you're trying to come in and say, yeah, no, he's totally right.
No, you're right. Good job being correct when you were facetious. Okay. So we saw the cemeteries. That was fascinating. Love that. I wish we'd had more time so I could be there long enough to see one of the New Orleans jazz bands doing a cemetery parade funeral thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The celebration of life with like a little marching band hauling the body to the internment.
Playing like loud jazz music.
Yeah, okay.
Didn't get to see that. So we took one extra day. We were there, and I found out there was something else in New Orleans I needed to see. And instead of going back home, I just called up my boss. I'm like, can I take another day of leave? And we stayed there. And that is, did you know that the United States National World War II Museum is in New Orleans, Louisiana?
I'm sure there are a lot of cities that have World War II museums or memorials. But
this is the official National World War II Museum.
This is the one that's sanctioned by, what, presumably the government somehow?
Yeah, I don't know. Some, in the 1950s, some senator from Louisiana won a game of rock, paper, scissors, or, your state gets this other military contract.
Okay.
Or whatever.
So you went to the World War II Museum endorsed by some outside authority.
It is fantastic. Listeners, if you're at all interested in history, specifically World War II, you probably already knew about this place. But if you didn't and you were looking for something to tip you over the edge to go to New Orleans, the World War II Museum is worth maybe 2 days.
It is super interesting that there are places like that. If you really start looking, there's interesting little stops everywhere. And I remember what the example that jumps into my mind is whenever we go to Legoland in California, on the way there, just along our trip is March Airfield, which is a reserve air base, I believe. But they have a little hangar off to one side that they gave to some like civilian organization. They turned it into just an aircraft museum. And my wife found it while we were there. It was like, oh, hey, while we're driving home, that stop, that just get off the freeway and drive 1 mile and go check out this little air museum real quick. And both times, I'm totally expecting it to be just like, oh, it's going to be, random static displays and some nonsense. But it was a legitimate, like you walk in and holy crap, there is an SR-71 in this hangar. There's only like a dozen of those in existence. So
yeah,
there's little gems like that all over the place.
I agree. And anybody that wants to can set up like a Civil War museum in their town and gather some artifacts and call it that. But this is the official World War II museum. So the first thing you do is it's like where you have to get a ticket in advance and they stagger your arrival time so that they don't get a glut of people coming through. And then they have this experience that they filter you into where they pretend like you're a recruit that's volunteering to participate in World War II, and they put you on a train that shows a little video about what it was like to go through the military entrance processing station, to go get indoctrinated and trained up and sent to war.
I went through one of those. They're bad.
Yeah, they make it kind of romantic. So then you go out and you can either take the linear path where you learn like everything about the Pacific Theater and everything about the European theater, or you can kind of take it as you want and go see all the artifacts, or go to there's a home front exhibit that talks about all the industrial production and the art and the culture and the propaganda and all those kinds of things.
All the propaganda for World War II was the best.
Yeah. Or there's a D-Day wing where you can just see everything about D-Day. I learned so much. It was great. It was really cool.
Did you go through multiple times for all the different theaters? I want to go again and learn about the Pacific Theater.
No, we ran out of time. I might go back. I feel like I only saw about half of it.
That's cool. I mean, that's awesome that you found something so interesting down there.
Yeah.
Now, how many hours did you spend at that World War II museum?
6.
How many hours did you spend at the zoo?
6.
Oh, just like the whole day? Like the whole active day? If you could reallocate some of those hours, how would you split it out?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's just two completely different experiences. It's like if you had a plate of food and like half of it was a steak and the other half was like mashed potatoes and broccoli. How much would you reallocate of the vegetables to meat? Would you just have a whole plate of meat?
Yes, every time. No question.
Okay, no, not me. I think having the vegetables enhances the meat.
Enhances the meat. That's way like these words. So I understood each word in that sentence, but I don't understand them together. That makes no sense. Like the meat.
Don't you do this with anything in your life? The moderation makes it so that each piece is better.
Nope. You're talking to the wrong person if you're talking about moderation.
Ben, if I could have half my plate filled with steak, it would be better if it was just all steak.
If I find a song that I like, I listen to just that song on repeat for hours on end until I can't stand it anymore. I'm a weird person when it comes to consuming things that I like. So,
okay. There's got to be something you're like this on. Do you ever stop playing one game and play a different game that's of a different genre just so that you don't get fed up with the one?
Nope. If I get fed up with the one, I just stop playing it entirely for years at a time.
Man, there's got to be something you do this about.
I do something. If I like something, I do it with incredible focus until I'm sick of it, and then I move on to the next thing. This is probably why I've had so many hobbies throughout my life. I think that's hyper-fixating.
I'm going to come up with a name for this, and I'm going to put a poll on Reddit so you can weigh in and tell us what you think. Are you the kind of person that likes some variety in your life so that you don't get burnt out on any one thing? Or are you the kind of person that just goes all in on one thing until you're sick of it?
Now that we are done talking... I'm sorry, are you done talking about...
Yeah, I'm done talking about New Orleans.
Okay, I want to talk about zoos for a second because growing up, there was 2 zoos in my hometown. Okay,
I was having a crisis about this, but go ahead.
About zoos?
Yeah.
You're having a crisis about zoos? Okay.
As a kid, every time I went to a zoo, I always thought the animals wanted to be there. At this time, I was kind of conscious of the fact that not all of them did.
All right, so that's kind of where I'm taking this. Like, there's 2 zoos that I went to in Phoenix when I was growing up. There's one called the Wildlife World Zoo on the west side near my house. I went there a couple of times for school field trips, and it's pretty good. I've been there a couple of times since, and they put a lot of money, but that doesn't matter. And then there's the Phoenix Zoo, which is very good. And like
It might be on my wife's best friend's list of 25 zoos.
It's a very good zoo, and it's one of those zoos that prides themselves on, oh, we're a nonprofit and people donate money and we build like amazing things, and they have like multiple programs where they're bringing back endangered species and like breeding things, all kinds of stuff. But this is the thing. That set the bar for, in my mind, what a zoo is. A zoo is some kind of nonprofit organization of like-minded people that are funded by donors that want legitimately to make the lives of animals better on this planet. And one of the ways they do that is by educating people about these animals.
Okay, I love it. So if there were a continuum of zoos, it maybe if I don't know what the factor along the continuum is, but we'll just say the purity of their motives.
Yes.
With one being the wellness of animals on planet Earth on one end. At the far other end of the spectrum is just like exploiting of other species for profit.
Here's the thing. I was brought up in a place that has zoos that are like an 8 or 9 on that spectrum, okay?
Right.
And then
of the purity of their motives for the wellness of other species on the planet.
Exactly. And then how often do you think about zoos after that? You don't. You don't think about zoos unless you're at a zoo.
Kinda. I mean, you know, when you hear about an animal or you see an animal and you think, oh, I saw one of those one time.
Yeah, but that's the extent of your deep thoughts about a zoo, okay?
Right. I've never been a member of the Zoo Society or anything like that.
Okay. Well, then I was stationed at Clovis, New Mexico,
right,
which is in the middle of nowhere.
Rural middle of nowhere.
Rural middle of nowhere. The base, the Air Force base that is there constitutes half of the population of the town, okay?
Uh-huh.
And they have a zoo in Clovis, New Mexico. There is a zoo in Clovis, New Mexico. And we heard that, and we had a kid, we're like, oh, we should take our young son to the zoo and let him see all the animals.
Okay.
Ben, on our purity scale, the Clovis, New Mexico Zoo, and I don't care if they do sue us for slander. This is absolutely true, and they can't argue with it. They're at the far other end of this, okay?
Okay. This sounds shocking.
It is so bad. Like, I regularly call it a refugee camp for animals because that's what it feels like. All of the enclosures...
A concentration camp?
Not that bad. They're not actively torturing them that I am aware of. But here's a great example. They have giraffes at the zoo, and they pride themselves on like, oh, this is one of the only places in New Mexico you can see giraffes. One of their giraffes died of exposure in the middle of winter while I was there because they just didn't have enough facilities for it to stay warm.
Okay, so there's this ethical thing that zoos have to do where they want to have enough variety, but they also have to be realistic about their local climate and geography. I'm not going to the Phoenix Zoo and expecting to find penguins.
They had, do they have? I don't think they have penguins at the Phoenix Zoo, but they do at the Wildlife World Zoo, and it's like a cold chamber. They take care of penguins. But this place was not set up for this. They had a hyena in a chain link fence cage that could be measured in hundreds of square feet. Hyenas are animals that are used to going miles for meals, and they got it in. Like I said, you can measure it. It's smaller than a small apartment. Is where this hyena is penned up in.
Right.
It's every enclosure is like that. It's atrociously bad for these animals, and it started me asking questions about what are the requirements? Like what government organization is policing these people from just what's stopping me as a private citizen from just buying exotic animals, throwing them into tiny cages in my yard, and saying it's a zoo? Like that's how bad this place was that I'm questioning all of the standards and practices around it.
How often do you think about this? Was it that traumatic?
Whenever I think about zoos, I think about the Clovis Zoo and how like those animals are basically in an internment camp.
Okay, one opportunity to me for a zoo regionally, like you said, if you on the purity of the motive scale, if they're on the high end, is just to be a showcase for what the local flora and fauna are, where they are inviting you at the Audubon Zoo in New Orleans. They have a huge section of the zoo dedicated to basically just reproducing a Louisiana swamp. They got alligators, they got all of the birds and other animals that are associated with that, and it's the best part of the zoo. If you are interested in Louisiana swamp wildlife, go to the Audubon Zoo in New Orleans. And that felt really at home. Like the animals there looked happy, they looked like they belonged, they looked like it was. But in that same zoo, they had a lion exhibit, they had a tiger exhibit, they had a jaguar, basically all the big cats. Okay. And they looked trapped. They looked disturbed. They looked miserable to be there. It was a small space. They couldn't go anywhere. It wasn't their natural terrain. They just were on display, and they didn't want to be.
So then think about it from the business perspective, right? Like if you are not a private organization, if you're relying on ticket sales to fund your enterprise, and you put all of this money into a big cat, and it's big cat enclosure, and it's big cat food, and it's big cat doctors, and all the things you're going to need to have a big cat, you want that enclosure to be designed in such a way that anybody can walk up to it and immediately see the big cat.
Yes, exactly. You don't want the tiger to be able to go hide in a corner where they can't see it.
But that's the tiger's natural habitat. Tiger wants to be in like a bamboo forest in complete and total cover 100% of its life.
Right.
So yeah, there are things that are at odds with the like you as a business are trying to do.
Yeah. On the other hand, I went to it had only been open for a week. They just created a brand new aviary. And the New Orleans Zoo is called the Audubon Zoo. And as you probably know, the Audubon Society is one of the most famous conservation of bird species organizations on the planet. So we went in their brand new aviary, and it was just filled with tropical birds like macaws and parrots and toucans and stuff. And they looked like they were in their natural habitat, and we were just wandering through it. And this was the open kind where like they were flying over our heads and landing on nearby perches and stuff. And
That's cool.
That was really cool. The big cats, on the other hand, looked miserable. But if you're building a zoo and you're trying to get mass numbers in, I bet that having lions and tigers in your zoo is definitely a large draw. If you just said, all right, they're miserable here, we don't have enough space, well, let's not have lions and tigers. Maybe that you just lose too many people.
Well, that's got to be in the top 10 things. Like, I'm going to open a zoo. What do we have to have here? Like, lions, elephants, and monkeys have got to be the top 3, right?
Yeah.
There
were elephants, too, and they also looked miserable.
Well, you see, there you go. You have elephants. Yeah. The Phoenix Zoo is funny with elephants. They have a couple. They just got a new one. And what was really funny is they had to spend a ton of money renovating the elephant enclosure because the new elephant that they bought hates the old elephant that they had. And so they don't get along. And these are multi-ton giant creatures, so you can't just have them fighting. Another thing that I thought was really funny, I don't know if they're still doing this, but they had a walkthrough area, like you were talking about the aviary. The Phoenix Zoo has a walkthrough area for monkeys. There's a handful of species of monkeys that's
where you can come in close contact with monkeys?
Yeah, you go into an airlock thing so the monkeys can't get out, but they're just freely moving around and doing stuff, and they can interact with you if they want to. You're not supposed to mess with them, but if they jump on your shoulder, they jump on your shoulder. What was really funny is they shut that entire part of the exhibit down while COVID was still a big problem because they didn't want the monkeys getting COVID.
Okay, that's really interesting. Was there evidence of that, or they were just worried about it?
I have no idea.
Because there was one exhibit in the New Orleans Zoo that said, keep your distance, these animals are sensitive to COVID. And it was like a bobcat.
Oh. Bobcats get COVID?
I guess.
That's interesting.
But maybe that was the only exhibit where like you could have gotten close enough where it might expose them. Because you couldn't get close enough to the tigers where they would be worried about it. Maybe tigers are sensitive to COVID too. I don't know. Maybe,
but I think we are more sensitive to tigers eating us than the tigers are sensitive to getting COVID.
That's how I felt about it. I mean, I didn't really. There was a couple of things I learned, and I was like, oh, I didn't know that. Like tigers are the biggest of all cats. I thought it was lions, but it's tigers.
Okay.
But lions are the only ones that have sexual dimorphism, where like in every other species, the males and the females look the same, but lions are the only ones where like the males look differently from the females.
I like how most animal species, aside from like us and lions, it's the male's job to try to be appealing to the female. And so it's the men that are all pretty and have to show off. And the women can do whatever.
Yeah. So Audubon Zoo is a good zoo. I was having a crisis of conscience about like, am I funding the exploitation of other species, or am I participating in their preservation? And like you said, on the good spectrum, you feel good about it. But I could see going to so on the far end of that spectrum are probably also things like circuses, where like they've got bears and lions and elephants that are performing for a crowd where they've been trained to do tricks.
Yeah, I would feel you gotta feel bad, right? Like I'm helping to fund this.
Yeah.
But there's something undeniable about seeing an elephant on a giant wooden ball that you're like, yeah, I would pay to see that, but they shouldn't have to be on giant wooden balls.
Right? All All right, we need to do a bad at technology segment. This one's a long time coming. I've kind of been hinting at it. We really need to do it. Josh, you have transitioned in your life to adopting the social media platform TikTok, and I have not yet. So we're going to talk about it from the perspective of somebody that's never used TikTok to somebody that uses it regularly, and we're going to talk about it.
Okay. So, how do I cage this conversation? I originally got TikTok because my wife, I think I mentioned this before, she was seeing things on Twitter because she's on Twitter. I'm not on Twitter. With Elon Musk taking over, I'm not planning on getting on Twitter because apparently it's a dumpster fire. But she saw enough things that were coming from TikTok on Twitter that she finally just installed TikTok and was watching TikToks, okay? And then there was a couple that she would lean over and show me. She's like, oh, look at this. This is funny. And there was one that was so funny that I installed the app at that moment. And I said, you need to send that to me so I can watch it forever.
Oh, what a fateful moment.
Since then, I've realized that the thing that I wanted her to send to me and the thing that got me onto TikTok in the first place is not even in the top 75% of things that are on TikTok.
Okay. So, but you had to start participating in it to really get an understanding. Like,
Yeah.
what you thought it was like was really different than what it was actually like.
So, TikTok is just, for anybody that's never used TikTok, never seen TikTok, doesn't know what we're talking about. It's just an app that has short videos, and they're typically short, but they can be longer. I've seen videos go as long as 5 minutes on TikTok.
So
like
that's
YouTube
what
videos.
that's what made Twitter characteristic. It's how they carved out a unique segment of the market. There was a character limit to how long of a message you could put out there. So it was characteristically short. So as YouTube is to video, as Twitter was to messaging, TikTok is to videos.
Yes. So if you think of going to like a news site and reading articles as one thing, and then Twitter being like the condensed short attention span version of that, I compare in my mind TikTok as the short attention span version of YouTube.
Okay. And yet a platform like that is still trying to take up as much of your attention as possible.
Oh.
Like just because their individual content segments are shorter in duration doesn't mean they're trying to take up less of your time.
So no, they want as much engagement as possible. And so one of the functions of TikTok, and like you don't get to really control what you're looking at. You have what's called your For You page or your feed or whatever. You open TikTok and it immediately gives you a short form video of something that the algorithm thinks that you'd be interested in. Okay.
Okay.
And then
it's not a channel you subscribe to.
You can follow specific users if you find somebody that you like.
I feel this way about Instagram. It's kind of the same.
Yeah, so it just gives you a random feed, and as you start to if you comment on a video, or if you like a video, or if you forward it to people, I've heard that since it has access to your microphone, it also tracks your laughter.
What?
So
all right, save that discussion. We'll talk about the spying aspect in a minute.
That's different. But the idea is that it's taking all of this feedback. Anything that you do with a video, it's plugging and feeding back into the algorithm so the algorithm can update and refine the things that it is feeding back to you to try to keep that engagement as high as possible.
I feel like this is universal. For any social media platform that exists, they're trying to create something that's unique about their platform and then increase individual users' engagement.
Yes, but here's the thing that TikTok did that no other platform has done for me that I've experienced, that I feel like it weaponized my own short attention span against me. Is that you're like, when you open the app, you get a video that the algorithm gave you. As soon as you're done watching the video, either the video is over and it just starts looping. Like there's no option. If the video ends, it just goes right back to the beginning and starts playing again so you can watch it over. Or you're just finished with it. Like, I don't like this. I'm not interested or whatever. You swipe up on your phone. You swipe up. And immediately, swipe on your phone like when you're swiping your pictures. Another video comes up as you're swiping your thumb and immediately starts playing.
It isn't you look at a thumbnail of it and decide if you want to try to watch it or not.
Whereas YouTube, you have to go and search for specific things or have it feed you, and you click on it to ask it to start playing a new video. It's just there. You swipe up, you get a new video.
I've heard YouTube content creators talk about how much effort they put into creating a good thumbnail.
To try to engage you, right? To try to grab you, because YouTube as a platform, you, for the most part, have to click on the next thing that you want to watch. Not so for TikTok. You swipe up and it's the next thing that the algorithm is spitting at you. And if
YouTube started introducing like autoplay the next video stuff, and I feel like there was so much backlash against it, they had to put in the little button to turn it off, and most people do.
Well, so are we talking about YouTube? Are we talking about TikTok?
No. So we're talking about TikTok. But my first question to you is, what's different? What space does TikTok fill that other video sharing platforms don't?
So I have found, since I've been on TikTok, that I don't have the attention span anymore for YouTube. I go to YouTube occasionally because, like, I'll bet the professor at Tulane Community College has put out a new video, and I'll turn it on and I will start watching it. And I don't have the attention span to watch a 15-minute long-form video anymore.
Wow.
I'm watching it and
you feel like
getting
your
bored.
brain has been rewired?
Yeah. Like I said, it weaponized my short attention span because, like I said, TikTok gives me what I want in a minute or two tops. Those are the longest videos. And then I go to the next thing that's 10 seconds of something hilarious. And then I swipe to the next thing of 10 seconds that's something hilarious. Next thing I know, I've been swiping through tens of thousands of videos for the last hour.
So you aren't the first person I've heard say this, but I don't think anyone's gotten to the root of it. Like, what is happening and what do we do about it? I was listening to popular internet personalities, John and Hank Green. John, famous author of The Fault in Our Stars, and Hank Green, a noted zoologist and
all around smart, nerdy
famous
person.
Content producer on YouTube and TikTok.
And TikTok.
They were talking about this, how they have this cognitive barrier now to consuming long form content.
Yeah, and I'm feeling that, and I'm noticing it in myself. There is long form content that I want to consume that I no longer have the attention span for.
Yikes.
Yeah, so I came to this conclusion last week that TikTok was bad for me when I got my phone is helpful in spitting out weekly reports of what my activity has been.
Yeah,
like
so
week.
you sent me like one of those charts that you screenshotted, and you're like, Ben, I quit TikTok for 2 hours. I'm like, what now? What happened?
Well, I screenshotted the bar chart because it showed me my app use history for that week.
Okay, for your phone, every app you'd use.
Yes, exactly. And for that 1 week, 7 days, I had logged 26 hours on TikTok.
That's like a part-time job.
And that's what I said to myself. I'm like, this is way, way too many hours to be on TikTok. And like, I looked at it for a minute, I sent it to you, and I'm like, this is a problem. And I identified it in myself. And Ben, I went to my phone and I uninstalled TikTok.
Wow. Good for you, Josh.
And then
you're an inspiration. For
the next 2 hours, anytime I stopped doing whatever I was doing for more than 3 seconds, I would open my phone and my muscle memory would go to the spot where the TikTok app button was, and it would try to click, but now it's clicking on just the phone desktop.
Man, this is like a human version of those experiments where you give a rat a button and expect them to push it, and then they get a food pellet.
I was preparing dinner. I remember I was boiling water. I poured pasta noodles into it. I set the box back down and I waited. I got the sauce heating up. I'm like, okay, I've got a couple of minutes while I sit here and babysit these noodles. And my phone by itself came out of my pocket and I'm scrolling looking for the TikTok app.
Okay. So this only lasted for 2 hours. Why did you decide to reinstall it?
Because that happened like 18 times in those 2 hours.
Okay, so couldn't you have been like, all right, I'll watch that 15-minute, half of that 15-minute video I've been meaning to watch about the new Magic set?
But that's the thing, is I didn't want to. I don't want to sit here and break a 15-minute long form video into multiple viewing sessions. I just want to fill this perceived what I'm expecting to be a minute or two max. I want to fill this time with something entertaining. And there
little
is
dopamine hits.
Yeah, just give me my fix. Just give me that cheese. Just let me hit that button and give me the food pellets out of the tube. Please, come on, hurry up. I can't get it fast enough. And I reinstalled TikTok.
Wow.
And
I
having
feel like
this,
we need to have a moment of silence for what happened there.
I got my weekly report again today, and deliberately trying to be on TikTok less this week. Because I uninstalled it. My intent was I'm recognizing the negative influence this is having on my habit patterns in my mind.
That's the first step of the 12 Steps program.
So I'm like, I'm going to try to use it less. I still want it. I still want the sand. I still want the sand to fill up those little moments in my life with something entertaining. But I'm going to use it less because I realize it's bad for me. And I get my weekly report today, and my TikTok use was 24 hours instead of 26 this past week.
The 2 hours were the 2 hours you had it uninstalled.
Oh, I hadn't put that together. Oh, this is bad. All right, this is this bad. All right, I'm doing it right now. I'm going to the like I'm gonna. You can watch me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna uninstall it again. Uninstall this app. Yes.
Wow, this is happening on the podcast.
Live. Yes. Uninstall
Wow.
TikTok. I can't. Talking to you, Ben. It just. Yes, it's entertaining, but like, what am I trading off for that? Like it's not about an opportunity cost. It's not that I am not consuming the media that I want. It's changing me. It is changing the way that I want to consume media, and that's
in
a
way that you're not comfortable with.
In a way that I don't like. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, if you'll indulge me for a second, you mentioned a metaphor a second ago that I want to build on. This is something they do sometimes in Sunday school in my church, and they give it religious values, but let's just use it for the context of what we're using here. Basically, you take a jar that represents the amount of time that you have in a day.
Yes.
And then you have a bunch of things that you're trying to fit in this jar, and you kind of represent them with different sizes. Then the example I've seen, you have like golf balls and pebbles and rice and water.
Yes.
And if you take the jar and you fill it with the rice or the sand, as you said, if you fill it with the sand first and then you try to put in the pebbles and then the golf balls, you still have a bunch of stuff left over.
Yeah, you can't, if you fill it with all the meaningless things that you don't care about first, you won't have the time for the things that are important to you.
Right. And that's the teaching moment of this metaphor is if you take the jar and you put all the golf balls in first and then you put in the pebbles, they'll shake into the cracks, and then you can put in all the sand and it all fits.
Exactly. So in my life, you have to define what are your golf balls, what is your gravel, what is your sand, like in decreasing order of importance to you.
But now the sand is self-aware.
Well, it's not the
sand,
and
it wants to take up more space more than its share of space in our jar.
It's not that. It's these companies are realizing that they are the sand, like YouTube, Audible, the podcast players of your choice, which I think we called out Spotify last time. Like all of these media things that exist out there that are competing for your attention, they recognize that they are the sand that it's going to fill in the gaps around your majorly important things, your family, your job, your sleep, presumably, your personal health, hopefully. Like there's things that are important to people, and they know that they're going to come in between that. And so I chose my words specifically. TikTok is weaponizing my own short attention span in order to increase its engagement. Each individual video is like you said it perfectly. It's a dopamine hit, and they're such short forms, and it's so easy to just scroll up with your thumb to the next one that they just keep coming. It's just too easy to sit there and find yourself trapped in this infinite loop of like you just forget like, oh, each TikTok is only 10 seconds. How much time am I really spending on this platform?
You lose track. They want you to lose track.
Out of 7 days of my life, Ben, I spent one full day, like 24 hours of 7 days that I lived. I spent one of them looking at TikTok videos.
All right, now you're making me wonder what I spend mine on because I haven't looked at one of those things in a while.
Dude, that is terrifying. Like one full day in maybe a month or a year, that's one thing. But in a week, in 1 week, I spent more time on TikTok than I probably spent talking to my kids.
Yeah. If I don't think it's good for us to be able to know all of that so effectively where we can just be like, yeah, this is how much minutes you spend on this particular activity in your life.
No, I think that's exactly the opposite. I think that knowing how much time you're spending doing these things is a powerful tool because that's the only thing that was going to make me recognize that this app is bad for me. Otherwise, if I didn't know how much time I was spending on it, I would happily just keep doing it forever. But now that I was armed with the knowledge of how much time that I was spending in a way that I didn't want to, that's the thing. I am making the decision that I want to be entertained for a few minutes, but then the app is powerful enough to then engage me for multiple hours. That's the part that I didn't like. If I want to be entertained, I want it to be a deliberate decision of how long I am spending being entertained.
All right, so here's my report.
Okay.
So last week, I spent an average of 6 hours a day looking at my phone, which already feels bad. 10 hours of that over the course of the week was entertainment, 9 hours was information and reading, and 8 hours was travel category. I don't know what that is. So apparently I spent 7 hours last week looking at Reddit, 6 hours looking at YouTube, and then next is my mobile game, and then weird stuff that I don't know how it's counting it, like Google Maps. Like, yeah, I was driving and Google Maps was up, but it's not like I was staring at my phone for all that time.
All right, so this is my latest one for this past week, March 12th through March 18th, okay? I deleted TikTok, so it's not on here. But it was 24 hours of TikTok.
Uh-huh.
It was 13 hours of Twitch, which I'm going to put an asterisk on that. Yes, it's 13 hours of Twitch, but what I do when I'm working is I just turn Twitch on my phone and I set it on a phone holder, and then I keep working. I just want that something going on in my ears.
They haven't figured that out. Like, what's the level of engagement with these things? Like, if I have an audio book on in the background, I might also be mowing the lawn.
Yeah. So exactly. My Twitch content, I'm never just sitting down on a couch fully 100% engaged in Twitch. I'm like, if Kenji Numathanami, if he's playing Magic or if he's playing Diablo 2 or whatever, it's just happening and it's there, but I'm not fully engaged with it.
Right.
Then it was YouTube for 4 hours, and then it was Reddit for 3 hours.
All right, listeners, this might be another poll. I'll put it on Reddit, even though that's one of the offending social media platforms. What is your top app? What's consuming your time? Facebook's up there in my top 5. Texting is a surprising number. And it's interesting what you said. I think some are characteristically very engaged. Like, if you're looking at TikTok, you were probably staring at your phone the whole time. If it was Twitch, it might have just been going in the background.
Exactly. Like, TikTok demands your full attention the entire time.
Huh. How do they fund it? Like, if it's short form content, how are they selling you things in order to pay for their free content?
Oh, easy, Ben. Every 10th video that I swipe up on is a paid promotional ad.
10th?
Every 10th, easily. And it doesn't tell you that it's a paid promotional ad until like 3 seconds into the video. And advertisers are very aware of that. And so ads on TikTok look like normal TikToks for the first like 3 or 4 seconds. And then the little banner pops up. It's like, oh, click here to go to the store. Click here to learn more about this product or whatever.
And you can skip it if you want once you realize.
There's nothing... Some advertisers haven't figured it out, like Walmart. Walmart has a ton of ads on TikTok, but you can tell it's a Walmart ad within half a second of swiping up onto that thing. It has the telltale colors. It has their same font. Like, there's just so many like little triggers like, oh, this is an ad, and you just immediately skip it.
I don't know. You say they haven't figured it out, but you just described it, and maybe they achieved their desired effect with you.
Maybe the fact that like
you're just aware of Walmart.
I know Walmart exists. I don't think anybody on America doesn't know Walmart exists.
I don't know. Sometimes the objectives of an advertising agency aren't necessarily want them to watch the whole thing and then click on the ad and buy something right now.
I will tell you, there is some unique advertising things that are happening on TikTok that I had never thought about until I saw it. So TikTok is unique in that it has trends. You'll see this thing pop up in somebody's video, and then like everybody will copy it, like everybody, and they call it a trend on TikTok. Oh, everybody did this dance for like a week, or everybody used this sound bite. Because TikTok makes it easy for you to make TikToks. I have made multiple TikToks. And
okay, talk about this for a second because I don't know anything about it. Is it a separate app or it's in the same app that you're watching videos on?
No. Built into TikTok, there's one button. You click it and it will let you record yourself, and it gives you a ton of super easy editing tools to create like a whatever kind of little video.
Give yourself a filter so you look like you're wearing makeup.
I did a TikTok where they did. There's a filter that will take a picture of you from your phone, send it to an AI, and then turn you into an anime character, all in like 10 seconds. And the TikTok is that process happening in real time. And it shows the screenshot that you took of yourself, and it shows the AI converting it into what you would look like as an anime character. And then you just post that with some music playing in the background.
Huh.
Anyway, the app gives you all of these super powerful editing tools that makes it incredibly easy to make professional grade, like 15-second videos and just throw it out there for the entire world to consume in under a minute. And I mean, that's cool. If you want to be a content creator, it's nice to have that kind of ability at the tips of your fingers. But what that does is that creates these trends, these copycats. Like, oh, this is a cool soundbite. Oh, this is a cool dance. Oh, this is a funny little quirky thing that this guy did. I saw one where this guy goes, all he did, the whole audio of the video was for the boys. And it's just a video of a guy with his hand. Like, take your hand, hold it up in the air, and splay your fingers out and elevate them a little bit above your palm. And he put a cardboard box on his fingertips. And all he did was he pulled his fingertips all together really fast and then spread them back apart. And the box popped up like an inch and then landed back on his hand and he caught it perfectly.
Uh-huh.
That was
now I want to try it.
That was with a cardboard box. That was the whole video. Guy goes, "For the boys," and then he did that where he flicked a box up in the air with one hand and then caught it back in that same hand, okay? For the next week, every, 50th or 100th video I saw was, you can do a thing called a stitch, where you take that video, you split it in half, and then like half of the screen is that video and the other half is you.
Uh-huh.
And the other half would be like somebody's ceiling. And then like he did it and he caught the thing, caught the box, and then little hands would pop up and then start applauding. Just like that. And then I would, that's funny. And then I would keep scrolling. And then the next day I would get a stitch of that video where half of it is the guy's box. The other half is the hands that come up at the end. And then the bottom half is another guy's hands. As soon as he caught the box, there's two sets of hands that pop up and then start applauding for the guy. And it got to, there was like 16 people where you have this tiny little video up in the corner of this guy flicking this box in the air and catching it. And then all of the other 16 screens, like the hands just pop up and start clapping for him. And if you had never seen the original video, you wouldn't be in on the running gag that this trend is creating.
Right.
So it's not just
that phenomenon, maybe not in that short of a time frame, has existed forever. Just there being a social trend. Like think of like the 1920s and what's the latest dance craze? It's the Charleston. It's humans have always wanted to participate in this group social activity.
Exactly. When we went to Magic 30, there was a trend that was going on where there was some filter that popped up that lets you take a little animated 3D person that was dancing this specific
and they'd just
dance.
be dancing and singing a song.
It was a little filter for augmented reality, so you can place it in the room that you're in, and it plays a little song, and this person is doing a little dance to it. And I jumped onto that trend. I checked into our hotel after I got off the plane because I was going to be there several hours before.
Yeah, you had her dancing on the table.
And I was sitting there. I'm like, I'm bored. Oh, I'm going to get in on this TikTok trend that I think is so funny. And I made a little TikTok of myself with this augmented reality person.
And it's out there forever. You can never take it back.
I can never take it back. But it took me less than a minute to make that.
Huh. Okay, so I want to talk about that for a sec. It's blew my mind because you're talking about algorithms, streaming, artificial intelligence. There's a ton of IT stuff happening in the background that couldn't have existed. Where there's massive amounts of data flying through the air. I mean, streaming video is data hungry. That's all going through servers somewhere and being computed and stored and shared and cached so that people can access it. I mean, there's a ton of IT stuff happening in the background behind all of this.
Oh yeah, there is. There's unarguably just so much money just in the back-end infrastructure because, like I said, there is no buffering. You flick up with your thumb, and the next video is playing instantly. So either they're doing some tricky things with buffering stuff to your phone or knowing what you're going to watch in the next couple of minutes, or they just have servers everywhere with this information like at its fingertips ready to dump it to you in high def. But either way, that's a ton of computing power and frankly just infrastructure and money.
Yeah. Wow. All of human existence converged on this moment so that we could have the replacement for what was it, Vine.
This is the tip of the spear when it comes to social media platforms and how it's interacting with the just people out in the world. And if for no other reason, I would encourage you to download it and try it for a day or two. Not because I endorse it, because like I said, I just uninstalled it because I think it's bad for me. But there is nothing like it that I've ever experienced in my life. Something that is so distilled. I keep saying weaponized attention span.
But it's kind of like saying, here, try this hit of crack cocaine, but only do it for a day.
Ben, this is...
Up to this point, you've also said, don't do this. I'm only going to send you 3 of these. It'll send you a link in a web browser and tell you to install the app, but you can just watch one video and stop.
There is something to be said for me telling you this is the most, the sharpest point of the spear when it comes to the digital realm's attack on human nature. There's something to be said where I can tell you that, and then there's experiencing it for yourself. Like, you can't describe spicy food to somebody that's never had spicy food.
That's a great example. All right, so let's talk about one last thing, and then we'll move on.
Okay.
What about China?
All right, so this is the thing. People, you might have heard the words TikTok pop up in the news in the last couple of weeks because TikTok is owned by a company that is based in China. And there are government organizations in the US that are afraid that they are using this app to conduct espionage on everyone. Because, like I said, there are rumors, I don't know if this is confirmed or not, that when I installed this app, like every other app, it asks you for permission to access specific things.
Your microphone, your photos.
It keeps asking me, and it has not stopped asking me.
Your location.
I did not give it access to my location, and I did not give it access to my contacts, but it still will not stop asking me for access to my contacts, so we can find your friends in TikTok, so you can link up and share the cool TikToks with each other. Like, haha, that's clever, but no. But if I ever want to make a TikTok, then it has to have access to both my camera and my microphone. And who's to say that it's not using the camera and the microphone at times that I don't specifically say it's allowed to use it? I just gave it blanket permission to access those things.
So we talked about all the above-the-board features this thing is doing of creating and sharing content, but do you think that the rumors about the possibility of it doing below-the-board things, about actually listening to us and tracking our location that could potentially be used for purposes exclusive to the Chinese government?
So let's say 3 facts. There are 3 facts that I know are true that feed into my belief of this, okay? The first one is... I already know that Google is using all of the information that it can get from me, whether it has permission to use it or not.
Right.
Because it's in their best interest to harvest as much data from me as possible.
Yes.
So, and all Google wants to do is make money. This app is owned by some company in China. Who knows what the Chinese government wants with my data? They probably just want to put it in a big library to do the data mining for, I don't know, super nefarious things. Who knows what they want to do with it? But I know that they want it. The second is that I know China has that social scoring program right now where, if you've never heard of this, do some research. And I have not done a ton of it. But
yeah, sure. It's like an episode of Black Mirror where they're rating your performance of the values of their society.
If you are a Chinese citizen, you have a score that is tied to your social media existence. And things can drive it up and down based on the things you watch, based on the things that you comment on, based on the media that you consume. And that score is directly tied to certain privileges that you have as a citizen in their state. So I know that China has a robust infrastructure for tracking and understanding people's social existence. That's the second fact.
This could get so perverse so fast.
The third fact that I have is I know for a fact that there are politicians in positions of power that have access to information that I don't. They get the top secret briefings from intelligence organizations. They get information from whatever national security sources that exist in our country. And if they come on TV and say, hey, this is a bad thing and we should probably get rid of it, I guarantee they are acting on information that I am not privy to.
Okay. So let me give you my most tinfoil hatty thing. And I'm not generally a tinfoil hatty person. In fact, I'm not. But let's just try to go let's say it has access to your contents and your location and your microphone and your camera, and that they're spying on you the maximum amount possible with utter nefariousness.
Okay.
And they're trying, and while on the surface it just looks like they're serving you up a stream of videos that give you a mild amount of amusement, in the background they're like profiling you and trying to determine what your job is, what kinds of information you have access to, how they could exploit that for their purposes.
Well, and you're talking about it as if they're going to find a person. They're going to use this app to identify people that are open to manipulation that they can then further develop as an intelligence asset. But what?
Just one. What about both? What if there's a macro and a micro aspect to this?
Well, I mean, I would consider those options reversed. Is that if they can identify a potential intelligence asset from this, that almost feels like a bonus prize.
Right.
Because the other thing
really the macro influence is
the macro is just collecting a ton of tiny pieces of seemingly insignificant pieces of information from everywhere. And then if you have the proper computing power and the algorithms and the intelligence to sift all of that sand, who knows how many nuggets of gold you're going to find. So
then what do you do with it? Like, what are we afraid is going to happen? Like, let's decide the Chinese want to invade Taiwan.
I'm not going there. Like, I don't care what China's macroeconomic policies are, or what their military concepts are, or what their political aspects are. What I do know is that China is seemingly the first nation state that has taken and recognized that this could be an asset for a totalitarian regime. Understanding what everybody in my population is doing and keeping an ear to the ground on what is actually happening with every citizen everywhere, that gives them a tactical advantage when it comes to governance.
They just lead you carefully down the road, seemingly with your consent.
And let's take it even a step back. Like, let's assume that they don't have any nefarious intentions at all. China has direct control over a lot of the production capacity. Like, the Chinese government has a lot of control over the private organizations in that country. I mean, what if they're just using all this information to identify, oh, this is the next bobblehead toy that we need to produce to sell to the stupid Americans? Like, even that gives them a leg up in world economy.
Huh. Yeah. Wow. Well, I don't know. I will ask you next time we do an episode of Bad at Magic how long your uninstallation of TikTok lasted this time. Because I know you're not going to reinstall it during the podcast. But
I'm proud to announce that I've been clean of TikTok for 15 minutes.
All right, Josh, we're bad at rhetoric this week. I want to go back to basics. So we kind of did away. We put bad at English on pause, and we kind of ran through a bad at logic. We might revisit that at some day. But now we're on to bad at rhetoric, and I want to go to the ground set of foundation for our knowledge of rhetoric. And at the very top level of utilizing rhetoric, or in other words, using language to try to persuade someone, is what your persuasive appeals. They're divided into three forms. There's pathos, ethos, and logos. You might have heard these. Pathos is an appeal to emotion. Ethos is an appeal to character or ethics, and logos is an appeal to reason.
Okay. I am nefarious for trying to do logos. Like all of my. You're educating me on this, and it clicks in so many ways talking about my past experiences, because anytime I tried to convince somebody of a course of action or something that I thought was correct when I was back in the military, I would always appeal to their logic. It's like A equals B.
This is the only valid one.
Yeah. It's like, why are you arguing with me? The logic is clear. And somebody would make an ethos argument talking about like the ethics of it, or a pathos argument like, well, it doesn't make me feel good. I'm like, my response would always be, your feelings are irrelevant. This is the logical course that we should take.
Ooh, this is going to come up as we get to Pentagon Wars here in a minute. So here's a quote from the Rhetoric site. Although they can be analyzed separately, these three appeals work together in combination towards persuasive ends. So I think any effective persuasion at least has a knowledge of the other two, even if you're primarily using one.
Well, and it has to be. Like, looking back and being the more, hopefully, knock on wood, more emotionally intelligent person now than I was then, appealing just to somebody's logic is not going to work on somebody that doesn't put as much weight into logic as they do into ethics.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Spock, but I love my mother. You know, just like
yeah, of course, Mr. Spock, the correct course of action is to kill this guy that potentially has the space virus, but that's just not the ethical thing to do, so your argument is falling on deaf ears.
Right. Yeah. I like that we've identified two characters there that go by those things. So pathos, ethos, and logos. And we'll go more into detail on those in future episodes. So what are you reading right now, Josh?
Ben, it's the middle of tax season. I don't commute anymore. I'm still working through the First Law series by Joe Abercrombie.
Okay. So when we were on our way to New Orleans, I did something that I don't get to do very often. Is I got my whole family packed in the car, and I'm going to be driving for 10 hours. And like, what audiobook do I have in the backlog that I've been putting off for a long time that I haven't listened to that's about 10 hours long?
You drove a minivan full of people and adolescents, and you made them suffer through an audiobook with you?
Yeah, we do it all the time. I think there's a special category of books. It's like, what are the ones I like to listen to that I would find interesting? And then what are the ones that are in our overlapping portion of the Venn diagram?
I don't know if this is fascinating or terrifying, but like, your whole family signed up to listen to an audiobook on your drive to New Orleans?
I'll tell you what really happened. We changed the audio system in the car, so it was just playing on the front speakers, and my wife and I listened to it. My kids in the back put on headphones.
Got it. Okay, that makes a whole lot more sense. Thank you.
But At some point in the drive, I think all of them took off their headphones and listened in and engaged, and we were talking about the story. In this case, the audiobook I chose was Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Ooh,
the
a classic. Yeah.
classic pirate tale of swashbuckling on the high seas in the late 19th century.
Oh, what a great character story. The development between the cabin boy and the cook that ends up being the bad guy. Spoilers for Treasure Island, everyone.
Long John Silver and oh boy, I forgot the cabin boy's name. Anyway, great classic story. I learned something fascinating about it, and that was when this story was popular in the late 19th century, about 50 years later, it came to prominence as it was made into one of the first talkie movies in 1934.
Oh.
And some costume designer and some dialogue writer sat down and basically decided what pirates would look and sound like for the rest of eternity. This movie was so influential that now anytime you think of anything having to do with pirates, it's based on this book and this film. And that's it.
That's cool. I like that piece of trivia. My family, we sat down and we watched Treasure Planet a few weeks back.
Which is a futuristic reimagining of the tale of Treasure Island.
But very true to the source material in that they have the same characters and they go through like kind of the same...
Was he called Jim Hawkins? That's the cabin boy's name.
He was Jim Hawkins.
Okay.
And it was still John something, but he was a cyborg. Like the meat is still there. The important things are still there, okay? And I remember when the movie was over, I asked my son, was Long John Silver the bad guy?
Uh-huh.
And like he gave me the classic 11-year-old answer, like, well, yeah. Like, okay. Well, then why did Jim let him go at the end? And then we had to have that in-depth discussion about like differing perspectives. And like, yeah, he was the bad guy from one point of view. Did he think he was the bad guy? Like just that whole discussion about that.
Okay, so where would you place Long John Silver on a D&D alignment chart?
I would put him on, between lawful and neutral evil.
Yeah, I want to say true neutral.
True neutral. Interesting. I put him on the evil side because he's still very self-focused. Like it's all about trying to find the treasure to enrich himself. But at the same time, I can see your argument because he really developed a legitimate character attachment and bond with Jim. Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
Spoilers for Treasure Island again, everybody.
And
Treasure Planet.
I think that's one of the things that made this tale resonate is the story of Long John Silver. Even though it's told from Jim Hawkins' perspective, he wasn't just your classic scenery-chewing, clearly morally bankrupt evil figure.
Well, I think
he was ambiguous.
This is what makes Treasure Island such a timeless story. Is that character interaction. Like we can set it in space with goofy sidekicks and things, and it's still impactful because the story really is about this guy who is set up as the clear antagonist of the story, but you sympathize with him for a big chunk of it. It's not till later you realize he is the bad guy, and you have to go through the same reconciliation process that Jim does, where I like him, he's a good person, why is he the bad guy?
Yeah. Good. Awesome. I wonder what happened to that movie. You know, that was in that weird period where Disney Animation Studios was trying to find their footing and figure out what to do with CG computer animation and stuff.
I watched a whole documentary on that, and
really?
Disney deliberately killed that movie. Like two of their top story animation guys during the Disney Renaissance, where they're coming out with all the great classics, Aladdin, Lion King, all those great animation movies, right? Those guys, like the head story guys, the head animators that were like the at the top of this, like the tip of the spear of this whole thing, kept saying, we want to do Treasure Planet. We want to do Treasure Planet. We want to do Treasure Planet. And Disney kept like, no, it's not going to work. No, it's not going to work. We don't want to put that out. We don't know how audiences would respond to the story that you've created. And like they use this whole like there's a ton of CGI in that movie.
Yeah.
When CGI was a brand new thing, which drove its budget really high. They specifically released it against some really strong competition from some of the other animation studios at the same time, and they did not put half of the advertising and marketing budget into it that they had. The idea was this, is they were deliberately trying to make those two guys despondent. We don't want you to have original thoughts. We want you to develop things that we know will make money. And
Okay,
so
that's a fascinating idea. I want to contextualize it in yours and mine running conversation about corporations being evil that only want to make money. Because there you can see an example where the corporation, the board of directors that was deciding things like the release schedule for a Disney Animation Studios production release and doing it to basically get their heads of their animation department in line, and they're willing to lose money to do it.
well, on that one project, because it was an investment in the long term. It's like, we don't want to reinforce your creativity. We want you to sit down and do the things that we know are going to be profitable. So
we're going to throw you a bone and let you make a movie you're insisting that you want to make and that you can, and we're going to spend a lot of money on it, but we want it to fail so that you can't try to do that again in the future.
We're going to spend the money on it that we need to make you happy, but on the other side, on the business side, we're going to make sure that we have all the ammunition we need for future arguments that we are going to have with you about trying to do your pet projects.
That's a really interesting self-fulfilling prophecy. So do you recommend that movie? Did you like it?
I thought it was really good, yes. There are some unnecessary characters and some weird story points, but I mean, it was still, it's Treasure Island. Treasure Island is a classic story for a reason.
Yeah. All right, let's do a quick board game survivor. So you sent me a screenshot today of you and your wife and your 2 kids playing a board game that I'd never seen before, and I want to know what it is.
Okay, so we deliberately had to push back recording of this podcast because I was in the middle of that game when I texted you. The game we played was called Villainous. Apparently there are multiple iterations of it, but the version that we were given as a gift is the Star Wars edition. And so the whole shtick of this game is that you pick a villain from the universe that you are playing in, and you are trying to achieve your villainous objectives before anybody else achieves their villainous objectives.
Okay, wait, so is this just a framework that you could add intellectual properties to and have villains from anywhere?
Absolutely. There are Disney villain. There's multiple versions
Expansion
of this
packs.
game. Not expansions, but different versions. Like there is a Disney Villainous where it's all Disney villains. Then you're trying to achieve Disney objectives. Like it's just a set of rules and a set of objectives. This is
an interesting trend in society where we've lately decided we're okay with our bad guys, and there's been the Disney movies of the backstories of the bad guys. Now we're board games where you're acting out being the villain.
It was interesting. We had to watch. All right. So if you've never played a board game before, like I said, we're in a board game renaissance.
Josh, you're talking to a non-zero portion of our listening audience. But go ahead.
You're absolutely correct. But if you're going to sit down with people that never played a board game, we had never played this board game before, and it came with a 30-page instruction manual. And I said to myself, I don't want to read this. And so I went to the internet and I typed in, how do I play this game? And I got a YouTube video, a 20-minute YouTube video that explains it from start to finish. This is how you set it up. This is how you play. This is some strategy tips, and then go play it. It's great.
Ooh, 20 minutes. That's a lot, Josh.
That's a lot, Ben. And I'll tell you right now, I love my wife more than anything on this planet Earth. Nicole is an amazing person. And every time the first thing she did this to me with was Dominion. I've told you that I have all the Dominion expansions, and I love Dominion.
It's a great game.
I had to twist her arms so hard the first handful of times to sit down and play Dominion, the times that I wanted to play it. And she did, and the entire time it was just painted in her body language and her tonality that I am throwing you a bone by being here.
Sarcasm, reluctance.
And it would...
My words, not yours.
But here's the thing, is every time she sits down to play that game, she dominates it. And she destroys everyone else at the table as if we are beneath her, as if this is a solved problem and it is not worth her time. And it vexes me to no end that she's
so good at it.
Yeah. And this is not the only game that she does this with, okay? So we sat down to play this game, and I started a 20-minute tutorial on how to play it, and I knew as soon as I saw that time, I'm like, ooh, we're pushing it. Because I'll tell you right now, we were setting it up as they were telling us how to set it up at the kitchen table, and the computer monitor is right there. So it's all happening simultaneously.
Sure.
The entire family is there listening to the instructions.
So it's not going to be 20
time.
minutes plus 4. You're trying to make it just only 20 minutes of prep.
Yes. But my kids, they're all in. They just want to play a board game, so they're paying rapt attention. There's nothing I can do to dissuade them at this point. But my wife, I looked at her, and I swear I could visualize an hourglass above her head. I'm like, as soon as that hourglass runs out, she will have lost all patience for this, and we will lose her. She will get up and walk away, and she won't play with us anymore.
Right.
And so like I'm doing everything I can to accelerate the process or make it as simplified as possible for her for us. Really, the whole thing. We just need to get started. If she gets started playing the game, she will be committed and she will finish. But I knew that there was a finite currency that I was spending, and so it was a bit of a scramble for me, at least at the beginning, to get this going.
Okay. I can relate to what you're saying so hard because I love spending time with my wife, and there's certain activities that she doesn't want to do, and if I ever get her to participate in them, I'll bend over backwards to try to make her experience comfortable and easy so that she won't go away.
Oh, Ben, like there's so many times that this applies to my spouse specifically. Like, for example, there's a show we watch that's animated from FX called Archer, and it's about spies, and it's an animated show, and it's adult content, and it's hilarious, and we watch it together, and it's fine. There is an animated show called Arcane that is on Netflix that is so good. Holy crap. Listeners, if you've never watched Arcane, Ben, we need to do an episode on Arcane. It is
okay. I haven't seen it.
It is so good. And I am just frothing at the mouth to want to watch that with her and my kids because the show is so good. And every time I bring it up, she's like, no, I have no interest in watching that. I don't want to watch it with you. You watch other animated shows with me. Please watch this one. It is good and worth your time. I can't make that case hard enough, apparently.
Yeah. I mean, I love to listen to audiobooks with my wife, but until we're going on a 10-hour car ride to go see her best friend, I couldn't get her, otherwise I wasn't going to be able to get her. Sometimes I just have to wait for my moment. It
just goes back to like the things that you enjoy, you want to share with the most beloved people in your life.
I agree with that.
Anyway,
okay, so how did Villainous go once you actually got started playing?
Villainous was interesting because the whole thing is like I am trying to achieve my objectives, right? So I have based on the villain that I select, I have my own goals, I have my own play mechanics, I have my own play space, and
spoilers for Star Wars, who were the villains?
Okay, so I played as Moff Gideon.
Okay.
And my objective was to accrue a certain amount of resources, capture Grogu, and have the scientist and the blood samples all at the same time.
Just had your evil objectives were straight out of The Mandalorian.
Straight out of The Mandalorian. My son,
I assume Darth Vader, the Emperor, Grand Moff Tarkin.
My son played as
Jabba the Hutt.
Stop it. My son played as General Grievous, and his objective was to collect 8 lightsabers. And so every time he defeated a Jedi, he got a lightsaber, unless it was Ahsoka Tano or one of the other dual wielders, and he got 2 lightsabers.
Nice.
My daughter played as Kylo Ren, and her objective was to move all of her destiny tokens to the dark side instead of the light side of the Force.
Wow, this sounds really flexible.
And my wife played as Darth Vader, and her objective was to get Luke Skywalker conflicted. Now, he starts as focused, but you can switch him to conflicted. She had to get conflicted Luke Skywalker and Emperor Palpatine in the throne room at the same time.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I'm imagining a Man in the High Tower style version of Star Wars where like Darth Vader succeeded and Luke becomes the Emperor.
Yes, and Luke becomes like a Padawan or a Sith apprentice to Darth Vader or something, right?
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it is. Like everybody has their own deck of cards. Like these are the actions that I can take. These are the ways that I can progress my own objectives.
Okay, so that's a fascinating top-level topic, but it also sounds a bit uneven. How is it balanced?
It's balanced because there's also a separate deck of cards called the Fate deck that I can interact with any of my opponents. Like if I take specific actions, I can trip up my opponents from achieving their objectives. There's things that I can spend a portion of my turn instead of pursuing my objectives. I can slow down the other people.
Okay, and I assume the objectives that they're given somehow are all, I don't know, if it's a bucket, you all have to give the same amount of volume to fill it?
That's the tricky part, is figuring out, because all of the actions that I can take and all the things that I can do are different. They're unique depending on the villain that you choose. So the real mathematical burden is on the developers to make sure that the actions that I can take are designed and built in such a way that I don't have an advantage over my opponents.
Right. Like, you got to pick Darth Vader because his objectives are the easiest.
Yeah, exactly. Something like that. In this game that we were playing, my daughter, who is 8, she won. She ended up moving all of Kylo's destiny tokens to the dark side by killing Han Solo twice somehow.
Flavor violation.
I know, right? But but what's really funny about that is she won, and then my son had this funny thing. He's like, "Oh, let's all do like one more turn and see what would have happened." And then immediately after my daughter was my wife, and on that turn, she would have won. And then it was my turn, and I would have won. And then it was my son's turn, and then he would have won.
Okay, so some games have a way to balance for that. This game didn't have a way to do that?
No, we did.
Or it was just the coincidence of who went first?
It was not I went first in this game.
Oh, okay. So you needed an additional turn, not your same turn.
So let's be clear. I would have won that game if I didn't have such a terrible poker face. I drew the card that I finally needed to achieve my objectives, and apparently I was too giddy about it. And so my wife...
And then everyone attacked you.
My wife decided, instead of pursuing her objectives, to end my objectives. And so she interacted with me in a way that specifically stopped me from winning the game that turn.
Okay. So what's the final verdict on Villainous?
I really liked it, and I really liked the replayability. I think there was replayability there because there was other villains that we didn't get to play. And I think, like you talked about, this was a structure of the game almost didn't matter as much as the IP that was put on top of it. Uh-huh. So there was this the bones of the game and how it played. You could put anything on top of it and it still plays that way. Right. So I'm sure there's other boxes out there. I'd be curious to play as like Gaston or something from an actual Disney IP and see.
Nice.
Even though he's not a villain, I'm sure he's in one of the villainous boxes.
I would love had to throw that in there.
I will die on this.
I got one other question for you. On a spectrum of like the outcome being completely random, other than the players' decisions to interact with each other, and on it being completely skill based and how good you are at something, where does it fall on there?
There was a lot of skill. There was enough decision-making that you had to make from turn to turn that if you were educated, you knew what the game was about, you knew how the mechanics worked, and you knew what you had. Like, there is room for skill and replayability there, I think.
Okay, cool. Well, maybe I'll check it out, or at least maybe next time I'm at your house. That sounds fun. I'll be like, hey, can we try that villain game?
Absolutely.
All right, for our main segment today, Josh, first, I want to ask you a question. We're going to talk about the Pentagon Wars, which is a 1998 HBO film, kind of an indie film almost, but with some big-name actors that everybody's heard of and seen.
I mean, it has one big-name actor and then a bunch of B or C listers.
I don't know. Okay. So the Pentagon Wars is based on a book that was an experience of an Air Force lieutenant colonel, former Academy graduate who retired from the Air Force in 1986. Surrounding the circumstances of the U.S. Army's acquisition and development of the Bradley fighting vehicle.
Yes. This movie takes place almost entirely as they make it very contentious. This Air Force guy is coming in from the outside. He's appointed by Congress, and his job is to sign off on the testing of this thing. Congress wants more objectivity coming out of these weapon development program, so they took somebody from another force to come in and look at an Army program and give the final check mark to, yes, this is legit, go ahead and move forward.
Yeah, so at its heart, it's about oversight. And there'd been some high-profile, prominent weapon system failures where the government had spent millions and maybe even billions of dollars developing a weapon system that was an utter failure. Missiles that couldn't hit their targets, vehicles that broke down when they were brand new, those kinds of things. And so Congress is like, why are we wasting all this money buying weapons that don't do what we're paying for them to do? We need some better oversight, so let's bring in somebody else to take a look.
As a specific example, like it was even brought up in the film, they were talking about at one point the M16, which was the standard assault rifle for infantrymen in the military in the 80s, long before
in the Vietnam era.
In the Vietnam era. And they even talked about how in Vietnam, like the M16 is a good rifle unless you get it dirty. If you get any water, any dirt, anything into the weapon, it has a tendency to jam. And that's not what you want in a rifle that's going into a jungle.
Right, unlike the AK-47.
Unlike the AK-47, which you can bury in your backyard for 10 years, dig it back up, and it will still fire 100 rounds without jamming. That rifle is ridiculous. But that's what the main character was talking about. Like, with better oversight and better testing and better objectivity in the development of this weapon system, lives could have been saved. Right. And so this whole movie is almost like how the bureaucracy boiled down between this Air Force lieutenant colonel, this outsider coming into this program that was flawed almost from the beginning, like discovering how bad it was and how bad the bureaucracy and the toxic environment and just the big names and personalities were surrounding this program, and trying to like make everybody wake up and realize, hey, this is important. We need to take this more seriously.
Okay, spoilers for the Pentagon Wars, but listeners, this is worth it. Like, if you haven't seen this, and a lot of people haven't, because it was kind of an indie project that flew below the radar, that military people tend to be aware of, but maybe civilians aren't. It's good. You can, if you have HBO Max, you can watch it on there. You can get it on DVD or Amazon Prime. You can rent it or buy it on there. Recommended. But that being said, spoilers for Pentagon Wars.
Yeah. Anybody that has ever asked me, what is it like being in the military? I tell them two things. I say, go watch Generation Kill or go watch the Pentagon Wars.
I still haven't watched Generation Kill.
We should watch Generation Kill. But those are the two medias that I point to. Like, that is exactly what it's like to be in the military.
Now, this is a specific subset in that these are generals and colonels that are making decisions related to spending of millions and millions of dollars on procurement of a weapon system, which is...
You say that, but Ben, look me in the eye and tell me you haven't been in charge of a couple $100,000 worth of budget and had these exact same problems.
You're right. This is a good microcosm that represents the big picture here.
This is what government bureaucracy looks and feels like on a day-to-day basis.
Now, however, this is by genre what's called a dark comedy.
Yes, where it's funny, but it's funny because it's talking about things that, like, this isn't funny.
Yeah, really at its heart is our main character, Colonel James Byrd Burton, who basically became a whistleblower. And whistleblowers are not popular in the organizations that they're blowing the whistle on.
I mean, we're going to jump right to the very end of this, but like one of the last things that this film does is it shows each of the major characters at the end, and it gives that print, like, this is what happened to these people after the events of the story.
Yeah.
And all of the bad guys went on to
everybody but the
things.
Whistleblower got promoted.
The whistleblower. And now there is a bit of bias here because it's based on the book that was written by the colonel that is the main character. He's like, oh, he was forced to retire. I'm like, well... I mean, it's just...
He chose not to accept his punitive reassignment.
He fell on his sword for this, and that's what happens when you fall on your sword.
You have to.
Your career is not going to go anywhere after that.
So he kind of had an interesting backstory. I didn't know this. I went and looked it up. But he had been a pilot, Air Force Academy graduate, became a pilot, and then he was medically grounded after he'd had an incident where he'd fainted in flight. And it turned out that he had a congenital issue with his stomach that caused internal bleeding.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't correctable, and they just grounded him and changed him. And so now you're going to be an acquisitions officer, which is a whole career field in the military. Like, your professional job is understanding what you've got to do to obligate government money.
There is my brother told me about this. He worked in an acquisitions and development squadron, and they had it printed out, the acquisitions process. And if you print it at normal font size, it is printed on a piece of paper that is the size of a wall in a room.
Oh, I can't wait. I'm putting the chart you're talking about in the show notes. So go to Facebook and look at the full realm. You'll see it. It's really, really, really complicated.
And the reason that it's really complicated is because on one side, on the truly, like, the high ideals side of this, is we want to make sure that the things that we are procuring on behalf of the federal government using taxpayer money is up to the standards and is going to fulfill the objective of which it is being procured for.
Well said.
At the other end of that spectrum, it's because it's a government bureaucracy and we are fixated on effectiveness and on efficiency. Everybody wants their finger in this pie, so everybody can take credit for it if it goes right.
Yes, and this is one of the themes of my life and my career in the Air Force, and that is these things are all additive and they're not cognizant of each other. It's all just more.
Yes, and nothing ever gets taken away. Everything always gets added. We're playing such insider baseball. We haven't even explained what this movie's about yet.
Okay. So there was a deficiency. As time marches on, the things that you're using to do the jobs that you're doing change, and maybe the jobs change a little bit too. And in the army, when you're on the ground and you're in a battle, you need a way to get your troops in and out of the fight in a way that's safe. And so there was this requirement to produce a vehicle that was armored and fast that could keep up with an M1 Abrams tank and drive 11 troops into the battle. It was a troop transport.
A troop transport. We need something to drive the kids to the front line so they can fight. That was it. And it took, I wrote this down, 17 years and $14 billion.
And it didn't take that much. That's the problem. When you had this complicated of a requirement that was this high profile, as it started going through that giant chart of all the processes you have to do to spend government money, it was self-defeating. It was monolithic. There were so many things that they were trying to do, and then there was something else that was happening, and that's what we call scope creep or requirement creep.
Yes, and so they did this great montage of like, because he was researching.
I love that montage. Link in the show notes to this montage.
The colonel is like, he gets all the documentation. He's like I'm looking at the original design spec of this thing, and I'm looking at what we ended up with. How did it get here? And they do this montage of the mission creep that Ben just mentioned. And like, they approved this troop transport. And then a couple years later, they're looking at it. It's like, you know what? I need a new reconnaissance vehicle, and I don't have room in the budget for it. This thing's fast. This thing's got some armor. Let's slap some reconnaissance ability on it. We'll put a turret on it with all of the reconnaissance equipment that we need. And then there's all these counter arguments like, but that's going to make it over 10 feet tall. You can't be a reconnaissance vehicle if you're that conspicuous. It's like, oh, it's totally fine. You know what? While we have a turret on it, might as well put a big old gun on it so it has some offensive capability. That's going to make it look like a tank, but it's a troop transport. So there's like, it's got not enough armor to be a tank. It's like, oh no, it's totally fine. We'll just put more offensive capability on it. So that way it can fight the tanks that are going to be shooting at it because they think it's a tank. Well, there's no room in this troop transport for all of the ammunition and the missiles and stuff that you want to tack onto it. Oh, it's fine. We'll leave some of the troops at home. So you end up with a troop transport that can only haul 6 people or something.
Yeah, it was supposed to haul. So basically, after all of that requirement creep, you're now only delivering half of your original required capability.
And they put it. It was so poetic the way they did it. So what we have is a troop transport that can't carry troops, a reconnaissance vehicle that's too conspicuous to do good reconnaissance. It looks like a tank but has no armor, but the offensive capability to level a city. Like, what is this thing that we're even making?
It's what happens when this system goes wrong. So in the past, there were problems, and I know this because I just finished reading the biography of Harry Truman, and he was a congressman who earned his right to be the vice president by scrutinizing government spending where there was corruption. Basically, military programs that happened during World War II where they were procuring government capabilities and there was corruption involved. And so because of all that corruption, that got codified into law, which became part of this acquisition process that now requires a master's degree to navigate.
Well, and the opening scene is the lieutenant colonel reporting to the 2-star general who is in charge, the 2-star army general.
Okay,
who
now
is
we
in
need
charge
to talk
of this
about the
process.
actors and the characters.
Okay, yeah. So the actor for the 2-star general was Kelsey Grammer. And he did an excellent job of just being angry at people that got in his way.
2-star Major General Partridge, and he's your stereotypical career army officer.
But he was also so low-key corrupt. Like the first meeting that he had with our protagonist, the Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, he literally went to his wall and pulled 2 pictures down. You see this person? Uh-huh. This was a person that worked for me that now makes like a ridiculous amount of money working in the private sector as a government contractor. He did that twice in the 3-minute conversation introducing himself to this guy.
Well, here's the thing, and what I didn't pick up on the first few times I watched this Lieutenant Colonel, Air Force Lieutenant Colonel is walking into this Army 2-star's office, is there to just introduce himself as the person that Congress had appointed to have oversight on his acquisition. Yeah. This is an enemy to him.
Yes. This is the person that has the ultimate authority to shut me down.
And he started off with the carrot approach, which is, hey, I recognize that you're here as an independent, supposedly incorruptible person, but if you do what I think is good, I can help you get promoted, get a better job, those kinds of things. That's what I have the power to do, without actually saying that, and then wished him well. Did he threaten him that during that first meeting?
He did not threaten him during that first meeting. It was all carrot, no stick that time.
Okay.
But this sets up the plot, the almost like the antagonism from the beginning before this lieutenant colonel knows anything about the program that he's here to oversee, is all of these like implicit rewards for just going with the flow and being a team player and just doing the things that we ask you to do.
But Lieutenant Colonel Burton, played by Wesley from The Princess Bride, Carrie Ells, who was a British actor doing a terrible American accent.
I had no problems with his American accent. You give him too much stuff.
I think he was miscast, but the movie works in spite of him.
In spite of him. I think he was delightful. I don't know why you're dogging on him so hard.
I liked the character. Anyway, I don't know. It could. So Cary Ells plays this lieutenant colonel that comes in, and because it's his book and him telling the story, he's presenting his approach as being very principled.
Yes, like it shows him at one of the first testing, one of the live fire tests that they did. They put the Bradley fighting vehicle. Do we even mention that? This is the Bradley fighting vehicle that he was overseeing.
Yeah.
They put it out in a field and they shot it with a Russian RPG. And it like didn't penetrate.
RPG.
Didn't penetrate the armor, left kind of a dent, and everyone's like, oh, yes, wonderful, outstanding. And he's like, should we go look at it? He's like, no, we don't need to look at it. That's part of the test. It's fine. They'll take care of it later. And he's just got this like nagging suspicion, like, why don't I get to go look at it? And he starts digging deeper and he finds, oh, they're using the worst of the worst munitions on their live fire tests, to the point where he took a door off of a building and shot the same munitions at it, and it didn't penetrate the door.
Right.
Just to prove a point.
Okay, so then enter two more characters. Major Sayers, played by Tom Wright, and Colonel Bach, played by John McGinley, the classic John McGinley of Scrubs fame.
John McGinley is so underrated as an actor, and I love him in everything that he is in. I am so sad he is relegated to his B or C status.
So they're the leadership at the Aberdeen Proving Ground where they're conducting these tests according to all the government specifications in test battery. So they have this vehicle delivered by a contractor. They have the test protocol that they're following. But like you said, they're more interested in pushing this thing through the acquisitions process. So they're using the least possible ammunition that they can to technically meet the requirements of the test.
So they have their big giant flowchart on the wall, specifies the testing that they have to do. But they are stacking the deck in favor of the vehicle, all technically within regulation. Everything is technically correct, but it's not true to life. And this is Colonel Burton's problem.
Right.
Is they're doing all the tests that they're supposed to, but they're not real tests.
So here's the part where you could really make a strong case against Colonel Burton. The Army guys that are conducting these tests are on a rock-solid foundation according to all of the laws they're supposed to follow.
Yes, and Colonel Burton could, well within his rights, have signed off on all of the tests. Like, from a technical aspect, yes, they checked all of the boxes that they were supposed to. But he went that extra step and recognized that this isn't indicative of what actual combat is going to be like. We should probably do some more true-to-life tests. And that's when the antagonism immediately got in his face.
Yeah. So how you mentioned how he went and pulled a door off of a weapons storage depot and shot it with the same rocket and it wouldn't go through the door. When Colonel Bach and Major Sayers show up, they start giving him the nth degree for taking the door off because now they have a weapons storage depot that isn't secure, and that's going to require a guard until they can get it repaired. And those things don't just grow on trees.
And I love that because I swear I've had that conversation before. It's like, can you see? This munition didn't even go through the door. What kind of a test was this for the Bradley fighting vehicle? It's like, I don't know why you're talking about the test when you have destroyed a government door. And like there's two completely different conversations that they were having.
So what they were trying to portray in the movie is how ludicrous that is, but what you don't understand is how many times in my career I've had that exact conversation where everyone involved loses complete sight of the fact that you're talking about whether or not troops are going to die in combat and you're worried about a door.
Yes. It's hard to articulate to a civilian how that can happen with everybody. Nobody's being facetious. Nobody is trying to be.
Right. You're not being ironic. You're not being.
People are having legitimate conversations where they are more worried about the fact that you took a door off the hinges without authorization than they are about the fact that people are going to die if they sit in this vehicle and it gets shot.
Yeah. And that's really, I think, the heart of the conflict. That was probably what Colonel Burton was trying to capture in his book, and that's what this movie's supposed to be about. I got to admit, this time watching it, I think it was the third time I'd seen it, Josh, I was a lot more sympathetic to the antagonists than I had been in the past.
The people just going through the government bureaucracy. Well,
yes,
you're sitting up at MAGCOM staff. I can't imagine.
Am I becoming part of the problem? Is that why I'm so sympathetic this time around?
Everybody says this, Ben. Don't you remember? Remember, I want you to think back to a time when you were a captain making fun of the idiot decisions that they were making at the command staff. You're part of that now. That's what happens. That's what they always say. You're going to go to staff. You're going to realize what staff is going through, and it's going to change your whole perception. And now you're part of the problem.
Okay, but here's the thing. What this process is trying to accomplish is you want to execute a repeatable set of instructions that allow you to provide assurance to the Congress, to the American taxpayer, to your chain of command, that you have done the things that they have required of you that assures that this thing is safe, affordable, sustainable, usable, all those things. And
so I have no objection to everything that you just said, but
right.
What I'm going to say is the antagonist, the antagonist in this film specifically, the extra step that they took where it is portrayed that they knew about the deficiencies in this vehicle, and they were deliberately making decisions to not bring those up, to like completely overshadow those with data or other things. Like they knew that this wasn't up to snuff. And that was brought to fact by later in the movie, our Colonel Burton takes a trip to a manufacturing facility where they're actually making the thing, but they're making it to a different specification than what they were making for the Americans. Like it was in the movie, they said like, oh yeah, these are all for Israel. They wouldn't buy it the way that it was designed for the Americans. So we made a bunch of changes to make it legitimate. And that's how we're building it for them.
Right, and that was compelling. The part that I could really sympathize with is that you had these group of people that are trying to execute this labyrinthine, complex, bureaucratic process over a number of years. And Major General Partridge at one point said, I just need to force this thing through the end of the process and get it into production, and then we can make the changes. And what he was fighting against is what's called the waterfall procurement model, which is a long time ago, some people sat down and wrote down what the requirements for this thing were. And now, without accepting any more changes, they're trying to push it all the way through to the end. But by the time you get to the end of the procurement process, the requirement has changed. So do you start over again, or do you push it out and then fix it afterwards?
And that's the idea of that mission creep again. Like that general even said, I don't have a budget for a new reconnaissance capability, but this vehicle is already funded. Let's just change some aspects of it to fulfill my new requirement so I don't have to start over on this giant wall-sized flowchart.
There's also a bit of a visibility into the R&D thing here. Like we never get to see what R&D goes through, like us getting a new iPhone or a Samsung flip phone or whatever, those kinds of things. But at the tip of the spear, you've got a thing that's supposed to be able to withstand explosive ammunition. And in order to test it, you've got to build one and blow it up. And that costs a lot of money.
It's
true.
Like,
how many do you need to blow up before you're confident that you can start building them?
Well, and Kelsey Grammer's character, who is the Major General, was testifying to the Congress Armed Services Committee, and they asked him, why did you fill the gas tanks with water before you shot it with live ammunition? And he said, well, if we had filled it with gasoline, there's a good chance it would have exploded. And they're like, wouldn't that be the point of a live fire test? And his response was, well, if it had exploded in the test, how would we do more tests on it? Do you want me to just keep spending money and buying more of these things to blow up? And like, as if that's a legitimate argument for not doing the test appropriately.
Okay, so hear me out here, Josh. It actually is a legitimate argument. I did some research on the background of this, and what conclusion Congress actually came to is that what Burton was insisting on was what's called an overmatch test. Basically shooting it with something that you know that is going to destroy it, and it's not designed to be able to withstand.
Okay. So there's no point in doing an overmatch test. You already know it's going to be completely destroyed by that.
Right.
Okay, well, let's talk about my favorite part of the movie for a second.
Okay.
At one point, Colonel Burton got his hands, like somebody tipped him off and gave him a study that was done by a foreign government. The British military had done a study that said aluminum armor specifically of this type, when shot by live fire, had a tendency to burn and put off toxic fumes. And so he grabbed
terrible for a troop transport.
Probably bad for people that are inside of the thing. And so he wanted to know what happens to the troops inside of this. And they're like, oh, well, there's no way we can figure that out. It's like, well, let's just grab some sheep, throw them in this thing and shoot it with a rocket and see if all the sheep die from these deadly fumes.
Yeah.
And in an attempt to stop him, the army created an office.
Under the office of the Surgeon General.
Under the office of the Surgeon General, they created the office of ruminant procurement, an entire office of military people dedicated to researching and figuring out what the best kind of sheep would be for a specific kind of test. And
I don't know the actor that played this army captain in charge of the Office of Ruminant Procurement, but I loved how zealously he was championing his role in the government.
It was Lieutenant Griffin. It was the lieutenant. And Ben, this is my favorite character in the whole movie. And
he is the chief of the Army Office of Ruminant Procurement, and he is going to do it as best he can. Gosh darn it.
Lieutenant Colonel Burton shows up. The lieutenant's like, you must be Colonel Burton. I was told to expect you, sir. We are working on the requirements for the sheep for your test right now. We are talking about, what kind of ewes? Is it going to be ewes or is it going to be rams? Is it going to be long hair? Is it going to be short hair? Going to be big horn? Is it going to be short horn? And he goes through this whole thing. And I love this character so much, Ben, because I want to be this guy. I want to be, the army.
What is the ideal sheep to put inside of a Bradley fighting vehicle to determine if humans can live through toxic fumes?
Somehow the army reached into its bag of personnel and found a kid that has a biology degree and clearly was like the president of the 4-H club in his high school. And they said, we are creating an office that is dedicated to the study of sheep for testing, and we want you to be in charge of it. And this guy was all in. It is clear in this movie that this lieutenant was just his whole purpose in life was fulfilled with this is the intersection of everything that I believe in that is good and right, and I am going to do my job to the absolute maximum extent possible, without realizing that he is a pawn in a game, that he was just an obstacle that some general threw in the way.
A bureaucratic obstacle to prevent Colonel Burton from conducting his live fire tests on the Bradley fighting vehicle.
And I feel so bad for Lieutenant Griffin, because it's clear that his office was dissolved a month later, and he had to go back to whatever stupid job that he was doing before.
Aww.
And he would, for the rest of his army career, would look back on, there was a month where I worked in an office where I really could have made a difference.
A lot of the movie is shot at this, set that represented the Aberdeen Proving Grounds. It was a comedic version of Proving Grounds. I mean, they were comedically close to where the explosions were happening.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. There's at one point at the end where the thing exploded and debris is falling on the
raining
people
on
in the
stands where the observers were. Yeah. But it was fine for a black comedy. That's part of what made it a black comedy. So the army grunts at this base. There's one scene where they cut to the base and they're just giving us an establishing shot of what it's like, and you see some guys jogging in formation chanting Jodies. Did you hear the Jody that they sang?
Yeah, I want to be an airborne ranger. Yeah.
No, I thought they said Air Force.
Nope. No. That's not an army.
I
an army
swear,
is,
I had the captions. I thought they said, I want to be an Air Force major.
I want to be an airborne ranger. Obviously, you have not ran in formation and sang enough Jodies, sir.
I thought they were singing that their life sucks and they'd rather be in another force.
Ben, I was the one that had to memorize all the Jodies. I don't know why, but I have a really good memory, and I was the one that sang all the Jodies for every time we were running around in formation.
I want to be an airborne ranger.
That's not one.
Okay, I got to go back and look at it because I swear they said Air Force.
It's I want to be an airborne ranger. I promise you.
All right. Okay, so there's another character that's played, and that is they hired a senior NCO from the Army, played by Viola Davis, Sergeant Fanning, that worked for Colonel Burton. And they had this easy rapport where she was just, she didn't have any risk. She didn't have any dog in the fight. She was just supporting this colonel who was trying to do this impossible task. And once General Partridge realized that he wasn't going to be able to buy Colonel Burton off with promises of promotion and cushy jobs, he changed tactics. He put away the carrot and he got out the stick.
Yeah, and so the first thing that he did was Colonel Burton, the other colonels and the major went to the general and was like, he's asking for all of the testing reports, as if that's a terrible thing that this testing person should be asking for.
This congressional oversight, and they want to see the data.
It's like, well, then send them everything. And they did in classic Army fashion. And this is the thing, Ben. The Army has done this in real life multiple times.
Yeah, I'm sure this happened. I'm sure this is straight out of the book.
So there is this. There's a football player that played for the Arizona Cardinals, and then 9/11 happened, and then he ended his professional football career to join the Army.
Yeah,
and
everybody knows this story. Why can't I think of this guy's name?
Pat Tillman.
Pat Tillman.
And here's the thing: Pat Tillman died in a friendly fire incident. Okay. But the Army wanted to spin this as a PR win. It's not a conspiracy. He died in friendly fire.
No. Whether or not it was on purpose.
Whether or not it was on purpose. I tend to believe it's accidental because I've seen the Army. They can't do things on purpose to save their lives. But when the family of Pat Tillman asked, we want to see the reports surrounding the death of our son, they sent them like hundreds of thousands of pages and documents, and they were trying to bury the truth in just this overwhelming amount of data.
Yeah.
So this is a real thing that happens, and they did the same thing.
You say trying because if they're sitting in front of a congressional inquiry and they're asking, so Colonel Burton asked to see the reports, did you give him the reports? General Partridge can just say yes.
We gave him everything. We gave Colonel Burton everything that he asked for. Whether or not that was tens of thousands of pages of documents that were related to what he was asking for is irrelevant. All of what he asked for is in there.
Right. So there's this dramatic scene where they're hauling in, literal like wagon loads or dollies full of just stacks of file boxes of paperwork. And Sergeant Fanning comes to Colonel Burton and she's like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "I don't know." But they realize this is a play in this game that's happening between General Partridge's office and Colonel Burton's inquiry.
And then there's another interaction that he has with the general. And the general's like, well, if you had read the documentation. And Colonel Burton, of course, he wrote the book, so he's going to say this. I did read the documentation, General. 250 pages on the paint job. 200 pages on the bolts you used for the door. Like trying to flex on him. Like, yeah, I read everything that you sent me, and I know all about it.
So that was the gut check moment for our protagonist. And if you're a lieutenant colonel assigned to the Pentagon, you got nothing else to do, and this is your only job. This is your gut check moment. Like, am I going to integrity first or not? Like, I going to sit down and sort through this mountain of paper that the general sent me and find what it is I'm looking for, or am I going to throw up my hands and rubber stamp and pencil whip the report?
And the entire movie, they depict this Colonel Burton as like, I'm dedicated to doing the job that I was assigned. Like, I'm trying to determine if this vehicle is safe and meets the standards that it is supposed to, versus this entire industrial complex that had been built for the 14 years or the 17 years that we talked about before. Like, we just need to get this thing built. There's jobs dependent on this. There are, like the major talked about, he was going to get a cushy like contractor job after his last assignment here, partially because of this procurement process. And so there's all of these people and all this incentive to just say yes, push this thing through, get it into production, spend this taxpayer money on something that might not be the best, but is better than nothing.
So this happened at a time when like the Cold War was kind of coming to an end. The Soviet Union fell 6 years later, and this thing was procured from 2 decades before that, where the Russian threat was heavy and high. And so there might have been a justification to just be like, this is designed to defeat Russian tanks in combat, but that's probably never going to happen. So all that's at stake here is jobs and prosperity and the flow.
Well, and that's the thing, is over the life of this development, the real objective got muddied, right?
Yeah.
And then there's also all these conflicting inputs. Like, for example, there's several scenes where they have Kelsey Grammer as the Major General sitting down with the Secretary of Defense. And the Secretary of Defense in every one of his scenes makes it clear that he doesn't want to hear negative things. Like, I want to hear positive test results. Like, I keep getting blindsided by external agencies asking why I'm having all these problems, but there shouldn't be any problems. And the way that he phrases it, it's not that I want to know the truth about these things. It's that I want these problems to go away. And so now we have a Major General who's in a position where his direct superior is telling him to make it all work. Just make it all just go away and push through this process so I don't have to deal with the reporters or the politicians asking me why it's a problem.
And even though this process is supposed to exist, where like this process is so it's so heartless that you can execute it and it will either generate a positive or a negative in every space where it should. And it's a heartless computer that will generate a pass or fail. It's not. There's decision space. And like you said, the people's preferences will influence how they're executing the process and what the outcome will be.
Well, and here's the thing, like you can see that mindset trickling down. You can see the Secretary of Defense telling this Major General, I don't want to hear about problems. And the Major General telling the guys in charge of testing, we're sick, we can't hear about any problems. What can we do that's within our boundaries that can make this all okay?
So the Secretary of Defense character was kind of interesting because he also told them, like, hey, the only way I'm finding out about what's really going on, my pressure that I'm putting on you is making it so that you only tell me the good stuff, and then the bad stuff, the only way I hear about it is when somebody goes to the press and I'm getting a congressional inquiry breathing down my neck.
So pick your lane. Do you want to know the truth, or do you want us to hear all the positive things?
I think the message they were getting, that General Partridge was doing, is like, you don't want to know the truth.
No, I just want to hear the good things. I want everything to flow through this office without any hiccups.
Right. And this was under the Reagan administration. I don't know what the pressures were during that time period, but I think the actual Congress people that were portrayed were supposed to be real people. But there were some ridiculous scenes, like where he goes into the sauna in service dress.
Oh, gosh.
Is there a sauna in the Pentagon?
Oh, can we talk about uniforms for a second?
Everyone was... Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this one thing bothered me. It was bothering me so much I texted you about it. Okay.
Uh-huh.
If you've ever seen somebody in military uniform, they've got little flaps on their shoulders where they put their rank. And there's a little flap of cloth that goes onto this other flap of cloth that gets buttoned down, and it shows your rank on it, okay?
Yeah.
Those are your shoulder boards or your epaulets, just depending on what service you're a part of. And it's just a piece of cloth, so it's just floppy and it just sits there. Ben, I went to a military academy and I was a standards evaluations person, okay? There are things that you can buy that are sold by businesses that you insert into these pieces of cloth that are made of metal that make them stiff and flat and perfect, like crisp lines. And it doesn't matter where your shoulders are. They are always going to be flat and look like boards sitting on your shoulders. They are shoulder board stiffeners, and not a single person in this movie was wearing them. Everybody had like sloppy, droopy, curved shoulders, and all of their epaulets were contouring to their human body, and that drove me nuts. I would have written every single one of them up. If I was in charge of them, I'd have told you, hey, like, you're doing a great job, but you need to go spend $3 at the uniform store and go get some epaulet stiffeners, because that's driving me crazy.
I have no idea. I'm going to antagonize you a bit here, Josh, because I've never worn those, and I don't.
What?
And I know
what?
You went to a service academy, Josh. I went to officer training school.
How long have you been an officer in the United States military, Benjamin
Josh,
Rich?
I know there's no way to know this, but I'd be interested to know what % of people at the Pentagon actually wear those. But I'm guessing it's below 50%. Maybe the Marine Corps all wears them.
You really don't have these for your blues?
Josh, you're talking about the kind of thing that are not required, like shirt garters and, like going to the uniforms, going to an alterations and having them like alter the ends of your pants so that they're tighter and stuff like that. Like this is not required. This is not in the regulations.
Ben,
it's just the kind of thing they do to jack you up when you go to USAFA.
Ben, do you not wear shirt garters?
No. Why would I do that? It's uncomfortable.
I wear shirt garters in my civilian clothes, Ben. How do you not wear shirt garters to work?
I'll polish my boots, okay? But I'm not wearing shoulder epaulette stiffeners and shirt garters. Get out of here with that crap.
I'm having an existential crisis. I have no idea how you've been in the military for so long.
What value is that stuff?
That's none whatsoever. I don't know why it's so ingrained in me, but like I'm having a mental breakdown, Ben. Change the subject before I break.
Okay, so there's a character we haven't talked about yet. It's Colonel Smith. Colonel Smith is the one that was during the all of the requirement creep that just kept going back to the contractor and asking them to change the specifications of the weapon system.
I love this. This is the guy that's having to present it in front of the generals that keep changing their minds on what they want out of this vehicle. And
at one point, he makes one of the changes they asked him to make, and he goes back to him with it, and they go, "That's a stupid change. Why did you do that?" And he can't say, "Because you told me to." And so he just has to take the face shot and go back and change it back the way it was before.
And it's funny because they portray him having to go back to the same engineer that's drawing up the schematics for this thing every time. And that's the guy that's saying all the things that you want to say to the general that he's not allowed to.
This is idiotic. Why are you doing this? And he's like, just shut up. You're a contractor. We're paying you no matter what.
Yeah, and he that's the thing. At the end of it, he was just so done. It's like, all I have to show for this is 10 years and a stalled career. Just draw the stupid picture and move on. Like, he was done. He was so done with this whole process.
At the end of it, he got a pat on the back and a promotion to 1-star, which is not insignificant, and moved on. And you think that you don't hear from him again, but he later becomes a secret informant that starts feeding details to Colonel Burton as he's doing his inquiry.
He's the guy that sent the secret British research on the aluminum armor, yes, to the lieutenant colonel. He's the one that called him about, hey, why don't you go to California and check out this manufacturing plant where they were already making the thing that you haven't signed off on yet.
So there's this scene where this comes to a head where they meet. They drive to a secret location in the middle of a rainstorm and sit in the same car and look. And he says, "Were you followed?" Which is, a dark comedy's way of kind of like,
is this ridiculous? Like, we're colleagues. We work in the same building. Why can't we just
talk about this?
Yeah.
And this is where it's revealed that Colonel Smith had basically had a choice whether he was going to follow the program that the Army had given him or become a whistleblower. And he'd chosen to follow what the Army had given him. And it was portrayed as a cowardly thing to do.
It was portrayed that way, and it was also portrayed that he felt bad about it, which was the reason that he was feeding this information to Colonel Burton in the first place. Like, I am not willing to sacrifice my career in the Army to make it known that this thing is a piece of crap, but I'm willing to give you all the ammunition you need to make that argument.
I don't want to be connected to having given it to you even.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and destroy your own career?
Sacrifice your career.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that's portrayed as kind of a cowardly action. And at the very end, I think it's inferred that Colonel Smith is the one that goes to the Washington Post and leaks the information about...
He said in that meeting, in the car, in the rain, he's like, I'll make one phone call. And presumably that phone call was to the Washington Post to explain how the Bradley fighting vehicle had been in development for 17 years and had gone nowhere and was a waste of money and was just a terrible thing.
Now, the timing of that was really interesting because General Partridge finally realized he wasn't going to be able to get Colonel Burton to shut up and color. So he called up Colonel Burton's commanding officer, General DeGrasso, and had General DeGrasso give him an emergency reassignment that they pretend is completely administrative and unrelated to his performance of his job duties. This is a military government thing. You're not fired. You're not fired for cause. We're not going to talk about what the actual problem is. We're just going to pretend that there's an administrative thing that makes you have to go away, and now I can get someone else that will follow the system.
We just need to move you to Alaska, completely unrelated to the fact that you have pissed me off to no end ever since you've been here. This is also a thing that happens in the military. You can't fire officers, but you surely can have them reassigned someplace else where they're not your problem anymore.
Yeah. So, and then at that point, I was sitting there thinking about this. I was thinking about how we set up these processes and we follow the processes, but what do you do when the process becomes broken? And it isn't broken by design. It just happens over time as it starts to crumble under its own weight of the sheer weight of the bureaucracy.
This is one of the things that drove me out of the military, is because it took me my entire career to realize that all of the processes are broken, not for lack of good intentions. Everybody thinks they're helping. But that's the thing, is because the emphasis is on effectiveness and not efficiency, everybody thinks that they need a say in every decision that is made, which weighs everything down and slows everything to a snail's pace. And there is nothing that any individual can do to fix that. It takes a complete reboot of the system from the ground up, and nobody has that authority.
So that's the question I was asking. How do you do that? And in this case, the answer was you leak something to the press, that alerts Congress, and they open an inquiry. And it does bring about change.
It brought about change, kind of. The Bradley fighting vehicle was still developed. There was changes that were made, but they still made the thing. Everybody that was involved in the procurement process went on to either better jobs or got promoted. And the guy that was ultimately responsible for blowing the whistle on this whole thing suffered. Like, yeah. Did it really achieve its objective?
That is I think the only outcome for a whistleblower. You know, the system is designed to protect itself against that kind of thing. There was the scene when Smith and Burton were sitting in the car. Smith says, if the Pentagon had their choice between busting us or a Soviet spy, they'd choose us.
And it's that's the black comedy again, but unfortunately it's true because it's a lot easier to deal with the ramifications of one rogue or one like malintentioned officer than it is to admit the fact that they had a Soviet spy in their midst the entire time.
Right.
Like, it's
or that our process that we've been assuring you for 2 decades is rock solid is actually the source of our problems.
Right. And that's where the Pentagon Wars of this whole thing comes in, because there was the subtext of this being that you lose perspective. I mentioned that to you earlier. Like when you go to staff, like you make fun of staff for making stupid decisions, and then you go to staff and you start making the stupid decisions.
Yeah, well, Smith said, nobody moves up without getting things done. No promotion, no star, no cushy job with the contractor when you retire. You just have to like have things to check off. And if all you do is make something fail a test and put it back into the beginning of the process, you haven't delivered anything, and then what? How do you get promoted?
Yeah, you're seen as the problem. That's the idea, is that when you go to this place, the Pentagon specifically, you lose perspective because all of the incentives change. It's not about what's good for your subordinates because you don't have any subordinates. It's not about what's good for the fight because you're not in the fight. It's about what's good for you and your career through this political process because you're dealing with politicians and other generals all day.
Yeah, and there was a lot of stuff they didn't say openly that I don't know if it came from the book, but like there was that fancy lunch with the contractor where the general was strategizing with some obvious like CEO of a vehicle production company about how they're going to get this thing through.
Well, one of the conversation that the general was having on the phone in the first thing that we meet him was clearly with somebody talking about the politics of the procurement process. And he was talking about like, oh, well, we'll just have the landing gear made in Mississippi instead of Michigan, and we'll see how his constituents like that. Talking about this, just how like over bloated the military industrial complex is and how much influence that has over the politics.
Yeah. All right. So zoom back out to breaking the fourth wall. If you like the actor Kelsey Grammer, this is his tour de force. This is his magnum opus. If you like him from Cheers and Frasier, this is his greatest character he's ever produced.
There's scenes where he gets to be like he pretending to be friendly, and there's scenes where he just gets to go off and be the complete a-hole. And yeah, it's great.
Yeah, there's a scene where they cut to him at a party dressed in his military mess dress uniform, and he's delivering. It's that classic comedy joke where he's delivering the punchline and you didn't hear the rest of the joke and everyone laughs. It's the best example of that I've ever seen.
Yeah,
he has lines that are so ridiculous you can't even believe they wrote them down. Like somebody was correcting a memo he'd written. He's like, he swears and then he says, "We fought a revolution so we wouldn't have to pay attention to the British."
You nailed it. Like it's a tour de force for Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah. So at the end, you know, you have this whistleblower that basically is forced out of the military for the fact that he blew the whistle, but by doing the only thing he really had, which was sacrificing his career and his progression in the military to bring to light something he felt that was important. And I think the movie does a good job of kind of taking a step back from the farce of it all and looking into the lives of the people that might actually be impacted by this. It showed that he made a difference.
I really feel this way. I felt this way ever since I got out of the military, is that just the way that the bureaucracy is built and the way that the incentives are aligned with government processes, there's a bell curve of people and their capacity in the world. And at the low end of the bell curve, those people, they get filtered out. They're like, oh, you're not good enough. We're going to let you go. Sorry. But at the top of the bell curve, there are people that really, with the purest of intentions, want to make an impact on the world and the military and just doing all the right things. And they realize that the bureaucracy will not allow them to do that. And they also get filtered out. Either they leave for greener pastures or they recognize and get way too frustrated. How many chief information officers of the Air Force have you said have resigned their positions?
Yeah, several.
Yeah, so that's kind of indicative of what I'm talking about. Like the truly exceptional and the truly terrible, they all leave. And what you're left with is this kind of middle of the bell curve This is not anything against you, Ben. I'm saying all these things. I'm
I
realizing you're
get it.
still in.
I'm not taking it personal.
Right.
I've wondered if I'll ever have an opportunity come along where I can do a principled resignation to actually make a difference.
You can actually fall. Is there a sword that I can draw and fall on in a way that might have any kind of impact whatsoever?
Right. Other than just be like getting out of the pool and it closes in behind you and it's like you were never there.
Yeah, and that's what happens. Like people like Lieutenant Colonel Burton, who ended his career by being a rabble rouser in the Pentagon. All he was a story for 6 months, and then he was completely forgotten. He was replaced by people.
Except for that he also published a memoir.
There was a scene where even the NCO that was the mechanic at the testing grounds, as the colonel went to him and was like, you guys are the ones that are actually making these adjustments to the vehicle before it gets tested on. And
filling the ammunition with sand and the gas tanks with water.
And the senior NCO even said, it's like, why should I stick my neck out for you? Why should I go against the program when you're going to be gone in 6 months?
You're not going to protect me.
You're not going to protect me. Somebody else is going to backfill you and nobody's going to remember your name. Like he said that to the guy.
I like that. I mean, that's the call to action for our protagonists. Are you willing to put your career on the line for this, or are you just going to be part of the system?
Because you're asking me to. If I go and do the things you're asking me to, I am going to die on this hill. And I'm not going to do that if you're going to get away with it scot-free.
Yeah. Well, and because this is told from Colonel Burton's perspective, that's what we get. That he comes from this morally pure, place where he's fighting against this relentless machine and ultimately is able to call attention to the corruption or the brokenness of the system and make a difference.
And at the same time, it's so sad that, this guy's whole career was ended to point out one flaw in one procurement program in this enormous, complex, procurement. How many billions of dollars are spent every day in this government military-industrial complex? And it took one guy, everything that he had, ending his whole career in the military, to stop one of them.
All right, I want to read you a quote from the House Armed Services Committee report regarding Burton's dismissal following his whistleblowing.
Okay.
The House Armed Services Committee found that Burton's claims of malfeasance were rather due to, quote, a long-standing fundamental disagreement over testing methodology and, more importantly, the inability of the Office of the Secretary of Defense and the Army to reach an agreement on how testing is to be conducted. The Army has complied with all of Colonel Burton's issues of concern over the past several years.
Wow. This guy sacrificed his career, and what came out of that was a memo saying that, oh, yeah, the Army needs to change some of the things that it does.
Right. It was just a disagreement about the order in which you test things.
That's...
Instead of, the whole system is broken and we need to start over.
Yeah. No, what we got was, there's one step of this entire giant flow chart that might need some updating. And it took a guy ending his career just to bring that up.
Yeah. Do you know what's happened to the Bradley fighting vehicle in the years since then?
I have educated guesses, but I don't have any hard research.
What would be your guess as far as its current status in the force?
My guess was that they procured an initial influx of them. They upgraded them a couple of times, but they don't plan on buying any more or keeping it around.
Kind of like that. So I looked into this. Do you know they're currently in combat in Ukraine? We have at least 100 in combat in Ukraine.
Of course we do.
There's 4,500 units in active service in the U.S. Army and another 2,000 in war reserve storage.
6,500 of these pieces of crap. Okay.
Yeah. And another 600 in use by our allies. There have been 6 replacement programs started that have canceled or failed. And so we're still using this vehicle from 1986.
This thing is horribly flawed. It's not good at anything that it's supposed to do. But we can't replace it because that flowchart that takes up an entire wall of an office to go through is too complicated to replace it with anything that would fulfill its capability.
Basically, yes. I mean, there have been some modernization things and stuff, but yeah, we still use this same vehicle that was procured in 1986.
That is why the Air Force split off from the Army back in 19-whatever. Is because they recognized that if you wanted to have legitimate air power, you have to have a completely separate budget and procurement process than what the Army currently has, or else you're never going to get anything through it.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you didn't get this, I recommend this film. It's good for a laugh. It's good for a cry. It's good.
If you are a civilian, it's good for a laugh. If you are in the military, it's good for a cry.
It's an interesting. It's a caricature of the military, but it accurately reflects some of the problems that we face in a way that's palatable and easy to consume.
The first time I watched this movie, I was on an offsite procurement getaway for a weekend where we're in DC for a week talking to software people about government procurement processes. And we watched this movie. I watched it with my direct supervisor, who was a major. And the scene where Kelsey Grammer is asked by Congress, how much has this program cost up to date? And he has to ask a lieutenant that's like 3 seats over and get a binder and look it up. My major was aghast. And he goes, if you're a project manager, that number is tattooed to your brain. There is no way he doesn't know that off the top of his head. Like just that like little snippet just is such an insight into military procurement processes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, give it a look. I know it's a weird thing to come out, but that's why you listen to the Bad at Magic podcast, dear listener. So thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to us. If you want to engage, I'll put up a couple of polls I mentioned. We'd love to hear your engagement on the social media and the other things that we've talked about today. If you want to see some of the video clips that I talked about, those links will be in the show notes. If you want to see some of the photos and diagrams I talked about, that'll be on our Facebook page in the photo album for this episode. And if you want us to hear from you, please engage on those platforms. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
If you like what we do, consider sharing us with a friend. If you like us, maybe your friends will like us too. If you really want to show us some love, consider taking your phone out of your pocket and giving us a good review on the podcast player of your choice. It's unbelievable the visibility we can get from that. And if you want to cry, or if you're a civilian, laugh at some of the military stories that Ben and I have, from now until the end of time, consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page.
And until next time, try to be a little less bad at magic.